Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of history's most brutal workplaces, a medieval quarry, where the stones that built Europe's magnificent cathedrals came at a price measured in shattered bones, silicosis-riddled lungs, and lives cut grotesquely short. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a massive limestone pit as the first gray light of dawn creeps over the horizon, your breath misting in the cold air, while somewhere below in that yawning chasm, picks are already ringing against stone. You're about to spend the next 14 hours doing work so punishing that modern labor laws would shut the entire operation down in approximately 4 minutes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing this community spread across time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Sometime around 1320, let's say, in what will eventually become France, and you've just been hired as a quarry worker. Congratulations! You've secured one of the most dangerous jobs in medieval Europe, which is really saying something considering this is an era when workplace safety meant occasionally remembering to pray before operating heavy machinery. The quarry bella, flat piece of iron hanging from a wooden frame, clangs out its brutal morning announcement, and you're expected to be on your feet, tools in hand, ready to march toward the pit. You didn't get much sleep. How could you? Your body is already a catalog of yesterday's injuries. Bruised ribs from where a rope slipped and slammed you against the quarry wall, a thumbnail that's turned an impressive shade of purple-black after you misjudged a hammer swing, and a persistent cough that produces something you're trying very hard not to examine too closely. The stone dust gets everywhere in your hair, under your fingernails, coating the inside of your throat like a gritty paste. You've been doing this work for exactly 3 weeks, and you've already seen 2 men carried out on litters, one screaming, one silent in a way that was somehow worse. Your living situation isn't exactly helping with the whole rest and recovery situation. You're crammed into a lean-to shelter with 7 other quarry workers, sleeping on straw that hasn't been changed in who knows how long. The whole arrangement smells like unwashed bodies, damp wool, and something fungal you've stopped trying to identify. Someone's snoring sounds like a wild boar choking on gravel. You own exactly 3 things: the clothes you're wearing, a wooden bowl for meals, and a knife that's more rust than blade at this point. But the bell has rung, so you're hauling yourself upright, your joints popping like green wood in a fire. You splash some water on your face from the communal bucket water that's cold enough to make your teeth ache and probably contains more giardia than actual H2O. You grab the hunk of dark bread that's supposed to sustain you until the midday break. It's hard enough to use as a weapon, and you do use it as a weapon, actually knocking it against the shelter's wooden post to break off a piece small enough to jam in your mouth and gnaw on during the walk to the quarry. The pre-dawn world is painted in shades of gray and charcoal. Other workers are emerging from their own miserable sleeping arrangements, forming a ragged procession toward the quarry site about half a mile from the village. Nobody's chatting. There's some coughing, lots of spitting because everyone's trying to clear out the accumulated stone dust from their lungs, and the shuffle of feet wrapped in leather strips that generously call themselves shoes. Your footwear is already falling apart, and you've been here less than a month. You've watched men work barefoot when their shoes finally disintegrated, their feet turning into raw, bleeding messes that somehow still had to carry them through a full shift. The master of the quarry, a thick-shouldered man named Guillaume, who has somehow survived 20 years of this work, stands near the pit's edge with his arms crossed. His face looks like it's been carved from the same limestone you'll be extracting all hard angles and weathered surfaces. He's missing 2 fingers on his left hand, a souvenir from a chain that snapped back in 1308, and he considers himself lucky because he's seen chain accidents that turned men into something resembling dropped stew. Guillaume doesn't greet you or offer any words of encouragement. He just nods toward the pit, and you know what that means. Get down there and start making the noble families of Europe richer while you destroy your body one chisel strike at a time. Here's something they don't mention in those romantic medieval documentaries. Quarries were essentially open wounds in the earth, and working in them felt like being slowly digested. The pit before you drops about 60 feet down some quarries went much deeper, but this is enough to kill you very thoroughly if you fall, and it's accessed by a series of wooden ladders that have been repaired so many times they're more twine and hope than actual structure. You can see the rope and pulley system used to haul stone blocks up from the depths. The thick ropes showing frayed sections that will definitely be someone's problem very soon, possibly in the form of a catastrophic failure. You're handed your tools for the day by the tool keeper, a man with suspicious eyes who acts like you're personally planning to steal his precious iron implements. You get a hammer wooden handle worn smooth by countless hands, iron head that's been reforged more times than anyone can count. You get a chisel hand forged, tapered blade that you'll need to sharpen multiple times during your shift because limestone dulls everything. And you get a wedge-in iron spike used for splitting stone along its natural fissures, assuming you can find the natural fissures, which is its own skill requiring years of experience you absolutely don't have. The weight of these tools is comforting in a weird way. At least iron is solid, predictable. It's everything else about this job that wants you dead. You start your descent into the pit, and immediately you understand why medieval quarry workers had a life expectancy that would make a mayfly feel pretty good about its prospects. The ladder wobbles with each step. The rungs are spaced just irregularly enough to guarantee you'll misjudge one eventually. And there's this fun feature where the whole structure sways away from the wall when you're halfway down, leaving you dangling over the void while you pray to every saint you can remember. Someone above you is also descending, and their foot keeps coming down dangerously close to your fingers. Someone below you is already at work, and you can hear the ring of metal on stone echoing up through the pit like some kind of hellish church bell. Historians still argue whether medieval workers fully understood the concept of cumulative trauma the way repeated impacts, even small ones, could destroy joints and shatter bones over time. But you're about to get a very personal education in exactly that phenomenon. Your hands are already aching from gripping the ladder rungs, and you haven't even started the actual work yet. Your shoulders are screaming from the weight of the tools slung across your back. And your knees are already sending up warning flares about the day ahead, because so much of quarry work happens in cramped positions where you're kneeling on bare stone for hours at a time. You reach the quarry floor, and the temperature has dropped noticeably. The pit captures and holds cold air like a stone refrigerator, and the dampness here is profound. Water seeps constantly from the walls, pooling in depressions, turning the floor into a treacherous mix of slick stone and ankle-deep mud. The air tastes different down here too, heavy and mineral-rich, with an undertone of decay from organic matter that's gotten trapped in the pit and is slowly composting into something primordial. Guillaume has climbed down behind you. The man moves with the efficiency of someone who's made this descent approximately 1,000,000 times, and he's pointing at a section of the quarry face that needs to be worked. This is where you'll be spending your day. A vertical wall of limestone about 10 feet high, covered in tool marks from previous extractions. Your job is to free blocks of stone from this face, blocks that need to be roughly rectangular, roughly uniform, and absolutely free of the kind of cracks and fissures that would make them useless for construction. No pressure or anything, but the cathedral being built 3 days' journey from here needs about 12,000 blocks this year alone. And if this quarry doesn't produce its quota, well, Guillaume has made it very clear that workers are more replaceable than good stone. You approach the wall and place your hand against it, feeling the cool, slightly gritty surface. Limestone is sedimentary rock, formed from the compressed remains of ancient sea creatures over millions of years, which is a fascinating geological fact that does absolutely nothing to make your job easier. What matters is finding the beds, the natural horizontal layers where the stone will split more easily. What matters is identifying the joints, the vertical fractures that run through the rock. What matters is not accidentally creating a fracture that ruins an entire block and earns you a beating from Guillaume. You position your chisel against what you hope is a promising spot and raise your hammer. This is the moment, the first strike of what will be approximately 10,000 strikes before the midday break. The hammer comes down, the chisel bites into stone, and the impact travels up your arms like a miniature earthquake, rattling your teeth and making your elbows feel like someone just hit them with a smaller hammer. A tiny chip of limestone flies off, and you think, only about 9,999 more to go. Welcome to the Medieval Quarry, where the stones that built Gothic masterpieces were extracted by human beings who were treated as only slightly more valuable than the wooden tools they wielded. Where a day's work could leave you permanently disabled, and a moment's inattention could leave you permanently dead. Where the dust you're breathing right now is slowly turning your lungs into something resembling pumice stone. The monastery bell in the distance marks the Hurit's prime, the first liturgical hour, which means the monks are singing their morning prayers while you're down here engaged in what can only be described as combat with geological formations. There's something darkly funny about that contrast. Sacred voices raised in harmony up there, the percussion of hammers on chisels down here. Both groups are building toward heaven, supposedly, but only one group is destroying their bodies in the process. Around you, other workers are engaged in their own struggles with stone. There's a rhythm to quarry work, a kind of brutal percussion section where everyone's slightly out of sync but somehow creating a unified sound of industrial violence. Some workers are using picks to excavate around blocks that have already been partially freed. Others are working wedges into cracks, driving them deeper with sledgehammer blows that echo through the pit like thunder. One team is struggling with a block that's ready to be extracted, trying to get chains around it so it can be hoisted up to ground level, and you can hear them arguing about the best way to position the chains without having them slip, because a falling block will crush anything underneath it into a consistency best described as paste. Your hands are already blistering. The hammer handle, smooth as it is, still creates friction with each strike, and that friction is busily turning the soft skin of your palms into raw, weeping sores that will plague you for the rest of your very short career. Experienced quarry workers have calluses like armor plating, thick pads of dead skin that actually provide some protection. You have baby-soft office hands, metaphorically speaking, and the quarry is very interested in correcting that situation as painfully as possible. 3 weeks in, and you're already developing the quarryman's cough, that persistent hack that brings up gray-tinted phlegm streaked with blood. Stone dust is an insidious enemy. You can see it floating in the shafts of early morning light that penetrate the pit, tiny particles dancing like malevolent fairy dust. You're breathing it with every inhalation, and it's settling in your lungs, scratching the delicate tissues, creating tiny wounds that will scar over and scar over until your lungs are more scar tissue than functional organ. In the modern world, they call it silicosis. In the medieval world, they call it quarry lung or stone cutter's consumption. And they know it's a death sentence, just a slower one than falling rocks. But here's the thing that really drives home how brutal this life is. You knew all this before you took the job. Everyone knows that quarry work is a fast track to disability and early death. And yet, you're here because the alternatives were somehow worse. Starvation, maybe, outlaw life, serfdom under a lord who made Guillaume look like a humanitarian. The medieval economy had a way of backing people into corners where the choice was between different flavors of suffering. And you chose this flavor. So you keep swinging your hammer, keep positioning your chisel, keep trying to find the rhythm that will let you survive until the midday break. Your world has narrowed to this small section of limestone wall, to the ache building in your shoulders, to the dust coating your throat, to the cold seeping through your thin clothes. This is hour 1 of 14. The sun hasn't even fully risen yet. And somewhere far above, in a cathedral workshop, a master mason is sketching designs for a rose window that will take stone from this very quarry stone that's currently still imprisoned in the wall you're attacking with your increasingly painful hammer strikes. He's thinking about sacred geometry, about the mathematics of beauty, about creating something that will inspire awe for centuries. You're thinking about whether your blisters will pop before or after the midday meal. The first ladder descent was just practice. Turns out, because Guillaume has decided that the surface level of the quarry isn't producing the quality of stone the cathedral project demands, which means you're going deeper, much deeper into sections of the pit that make that first 60-foot drop look like a gentle stroll down a slight incline. You're being sent to the lower galleries, the places where the limestone is supposedly purer, denser, more perfect for the flying buttresses that some architect dreamed up while sitting comfortably in a heated room, probably drinking wine. The descent to the lower levels involves a combination of ladders, rope systems, and what can only charitably be described as controlled falling. You're following a more experienced worker named Arnaud, who's been in the quarries for 7 years, an achievement roughly equivalent to surviving 7 tours of duty in an active war zone. Arnaud moves with the cautious confidence of someone who's seen what happens when you get cocky around gravity, and he keeps looking back to make sure you're not doing anything catastrophically stupid, which is considerate of him given that your catastrophically stupid death could potentially take him out too if you fall wrong. The ladder system down to the second level is even more terrifying than the first because someone had the brilliant idea of angling it outward about 15 degrees, which means you're leaning backward into space as you climb down, your weight supported entirely by fingers that are already fatigued from the morning's work. Your tools are slung across your back again, and they keep shifting, throwing off your center of balance in ways that make your heart attempt to escape through your throat. Arnaud is saying something to you, but the words are getting lost in the acoustic weirdness of the quarry pit. Sounds bounce off the walls in strange ways, arriving at your ears distorted and delayed. About 30 feet down this second ladder, you make the mistake of looking down, and your brain helpfully informs you that you're now approximately 90 feet above the original quarry floor, suspended on a wooden structure that's making concerning creaking sounds. The human body wasn't designed for this. Your ancestors were savanna dwellers, persistence hunters, not mountain goats or whatever evolutionary dead end would feel comfortable in this situation. Your legs are shaking, your arms are burning, and you've got at least another 20 feet to go before you reach the ledge that marks the second level. Historians still argue whether medieval workers developed actual psychological conditions from this kind of chronic danger exposure, what we'd now recognize as anxiety disorders or PTSD, or whether they simply accepted that terror was just part of the job description. You're leaning toward the constant terror explanation because you can't imagine ever getting used to this feeling, this awful certainty that the next handhold could be the one that fails, sending you on a brief but memorable journey toward the unforgiving stone below. You finally reach the Ledhea platform that's maybe 4 feet wide, carved into the quarry wall and reinforced with wooden beams that have seen better decades. The ledge extends about 20 feet along the quarry face before it terminates in a rope bridge. And yes, you read that right, a rope bridge. Someone looked at this chasm and thought, you know what this needs? A suspended walkway made of materials that rot. The bridge spans about 15 feet to another ledge where the actual work site is located, and it's swaying gently in the air currents that move through the quarry like the breath of some sleeping stone giant. Arnaud crosses first, moving with quick, light steps, barely causing the bridge to sway. Then he turns and gestures for you to follow, and you're suddenly very aware of every horror story you've ever heard about rope bridges. These things are made from twisted hemp organic material that weakens when wet. And guess what? Everything down here is perpetually damp from the seeping groundwater. The planks underfoot are just rough-cut boards laid across the rope supports, and there are gaps between them wide enough to see straight down to the quarry floor, which is now so far below that a fall would give you plenty of time to reflect on your life choices before the abrupt conclusion. You step onto the bridge, and it immediately dips and sways in a way that makes your stomach attempt to exit your body through your mouth. The rope handrails are slick with moisture and probably mold, and they're positioned just low enough that you have to crouch slightly to grip them properly, which throws off your balance even more. You shuffle forward, 1 foot at a time, trying not to think about the fact that this bridge is probably inspected with the same rigorous attention to detail as everything else in the medieval workplace, which is to say, not at all, until something catastrophic happens. Halfway across, the bridge does this fun little bounce thing as it adjusts to your weight, and you freeze completely, locked in place by the absolute certainty that movement of any kind will send you plummeting. Arnaud is calling something to you from the other side, probably encouragement, but it sounds like he's speaking underwater, or maybe that's just the blood rushing through your ears. Your fingers are welded to the rope handrail with a grip that would impress rock climbers, and you have to consciously force each finger to release, allow you to shuffle forward another 6 inches, then regrip. The quarry has been operating at this site for about 15 years, and in that time, it's expanded both outward and downward, following the best veins of limestone wherever they lead. These lower galleries are newer excavations, which means the techniques for accessing them are still being figured out. You're essentially beta testing safety procedures with your life. Some quarries used carved stone stairs for access to lower levels, but that requires time and skill and resources that Guillaume apparently decided to spend elsewhere. Hence, ladder and rope bridge system that feels like it was designed by someone who really didn't like quarry workers very much. You finally make it across. Your legs are shaking so badly you nearly collapse when you reach solid stone, and Arnaud claps you on the shoulder with a grin that suggests he remembers his first time crossing and finds your terror amusing. The work site here is a horizontal gallery, a tunnel carved into the quarry face about 8 feet high and extending back into the darkness maybe 30 feet. This is where the premium stone is located. The cream-colored limestone with minimal iron staining and perfect bedding planes that splits into blocks so uniform they barely need finishing. But working in here comes with its own special suite of hazards. The ceiling is supported by wooden props, rough timber columns set at intervals that someone calculated were probably sufficient to hold up thousands of tons of rock. Probably. The calculations were done by experienced quarrymen using rules of thumb passed down through generations, which is either reassuring evidence of accumulated wisdom or terrifying evidence that nobody actually knows what they're doing. You're leaning toward the latter interpretation, especially when you notice that some of the support props are already bowing under the load, the wood creaking in a way that sounds like a warning. The air in here is different from the main pit. Stiller, heavier, with less circulation, which means the stone dust you're about to generate will just hang in the air like a fog, coating your lungs with even more efficiency. There's also this psychological weight to being underground, surrounded by rock, with only a few wooden posts standing between you and being crushed by several million pounds of geological formation. Some workers adapt to it. Some workers develop this trapped, panicky feeling that never quite goes away. You're discovering which category you fall into with each passing minute. Arnaud shows you where you'll be working a section of the gallery wall where he's already started extracting a block. The stone here is beautiful, you have to admit, even through your mounting dread. It's fine-grained and even-colored, the kind of limestone that carvers love because it's soft enough to work but hard enough to hold detail for centuries. This particular block will probably end up as part of a column or perhaps a section of decorative tracery. And hundreds of years from now, tourists will photograph it without giving a single thought to the person who extracted it from the earth while fighting off panic attacks in an underground gallery supported by wooden sticks. You position yourself next to Arnaud and begin the familiar routine. Chisel against stone, hammer against chisel. Repeat until either the stone yields or your body does. But down here, every hammer strike sounds different. The confined space amplifies the noise, turns each impact into a sharp report that echoes down the gallery and comes back to you slightly delayed, creating this weird auditory doubling effect that makes it hard to find your rhythm. The vibrations are different too. In the open pit, the impact energy dissipates into the surrounding space. In here, it bounces back through the stone, travels up through your arms with nowhere else to go, compounds with each strike until your shoulders are screaming and your elbows feel like someone's driving nails through the joints. The gallery is lit by oil lamps, shallow clay dishes filled with fish oil or rendered animal fat, with a wick floating in the middle producing a flame that gives off more smoke than light. These lamps are positioned at intervals along the gallery walls, creating pools of flickering yellow illumination separated by stretches of deep shadow. You're working in one of the shadow areas, relying mostly on feel to position your chisel, which adds a fun element of chance to the whole, trying not to smash your own fingers challenge. The lamp smoke is adding another layer of irritation to your already abused respiratory system, and you can taste it mixing with the stone dust, a combination flavor profile that definitely won't be showing up in any trendy restaurants, though it does have notes of burning fish and powdered rock with a finish of blood from where you bit your cheek. About an hour into the work, you hear a sound that makes every worker in the gallery stop simultaneously and look up at the ceiling. It's a crack, not loud, more like the sound of a thick tree branch breaking, but coming from somewhere in the rock above you. Arnaud's face goes very still, and he holds up his hand in a gesture that means don't move, don't breathe, don't exist too loudly. You're frozen in place, chisel still against the stone, while everyone listens for the follow-up sounds that will tell you whether this is just the rock settling or whether you need to run for your life, assuming there's anywhere to run to in a tunnel with one exit that's on the other side of a rope bridge. The sound doesn't repeat. The ceiling props creak but hold. Arnaud lets out a breath and gestures for work to resume, but everyone's moving more carefully now, striking the stone with less force, hyper-aware of the delicate balance, keeping several thousand tons of rock above their heads instead of on top of them. This is the psychological torture of quarry work, not just the constant physical danger, but the way that danger lurks in every sound, every vibration, every subtle shift in the rock around you. You've been working for maybe 90 minutes when the next descent begins, because apparently this wasn't deep enough. Guillaume appears at the gallery entrance. How he crossed that rope bridge without you hearing it is some kind of sorcery, and points at you and two other workers. You're being sent down to the third level, the deepest current excavation, where they're opening a new vein of particularly fine stone. The third level is accessed by what's essentially a vertical shaft with metal rungs hammered directly into the stone. And looking at it, you understand that this is where quarry workers come to terms with their mortality. The shaft drops straight down about 40 feet, and it's barely wider than your shoulders. You have to descend facing the wall, your feet finding the metal rungs by feel, your hands gripping other rungs above, moving in this rhythmic pattern: right foot down, left foot down, right hand down, left hand down. Repeat, and try not to think about what happens if one of those rungs pulls free from the stone. The rungs are slippery. Condensation is running down the shaft walls in constant streams, and there's this moss or algae growing on the metal that makes everything treacherously slick. You're descending into absolute darkness. The lamplight from above fades quickly, and the shaft below is unlit because carrying an oil lamp while climbing would require a third hand that you definitely don't have. So you're moving by feel alone, your feet probing for the next rung, sometimes finding it immediately, sometimes having a few seconds of heart-stopping terror where you're suspended by your hands while your feet wave around in the void searching for purchase. Your tools are still strapped to your back, and in this confined space, they're catching on the shaft walls, scraping against stone, threatening to throw you off balance. The descent seems to take hours, but probably lasts about 5 minutes of pure concentrated terror. Your arms are burning from supporting your weight. Your legs are shaking from the effort of controlled movement, and you've bitten through your lower lip at some point without even noticing. Then your foot touches down on solid stone, and you nearly weep with relief as you step away from the shaft into the third-level chamber. This is less a gallery and more a cavean irregular chamber, maybe 15 feet across, with a ceiling that varies from barely 6 feet high to almost 9 feet in places. The stone walls glisten with moisture, and there's actual standing water in the depressions of the floor, cold pools that you immediately step into because you can't see them in the near darkness. One oil lamp sits on a rock ledge, providing just enough light to create grotesque shadows, but not enough to actually see what you're doing. The air down here is thick and cold and tastes like wet stone and earth and something organic that might be bat guano or might be something worse. 2 workers are already down here, and they look like they've been working in Hell's basement, which is essentially accurate. They're covered in a paste of stone dust and water, their faces streaked with mud, their eyes red-rimmed and haunted. One of Thema Man, whose name you think is Bertrandes, attacking a section of the chamber wall with his pick, each strike sending up a spray of water and pulverized stone. The other is working on his knees in one of those water pools, trying to undercut a block, and you can hear his teeth chattering from the cold. This is where you're supposed to work. This flooded cave at the bottom of a vertical shaft, reached by crossing a rope bridge and descending multiple ladder systems, approximately 150 feet below the surface world where sane people are doing sane jobs like farming or weaving or literally anything else. The stone down here might be perfect, might be exactly what the cathedral builders need, but the cost is being extracted from bodies and sanity in equal measure. You take your position at the wall and begin to work, and immediately you understand that this is different from everything above. The stone here is harder. You can feel it in the way your chisel barely bites, in the way each hammer strike sends jarring impacts back through your arms. The moisture makes everything slippery. Your hammer handle keeps twisting in your grip. Your chisel slides off target, and you're constantly wiping water from your eyes. Your knees are in a cold pool, and the water is soaking through your clothes, leaching heat from your body with ruthless efficiency. The chamber amplifies sound in bizarre ways. Sometimes your hammer strikes echo so loudly it feels like the stone is shouting back at you. Other times the sound just seems to disappear into the rock, absorbed and nullified. You can hear water dripping constantly, a maddening percussion that never stops. And occasionally there's this deeper sound, like distant thunder, which is probably just the quarry settling, but could also be the sound of thousands of tons of rock deciding it's done with this whole staying-in-place arrangement. Historians still argue whether workers in conditions like these developed superstitions or rituals to cope with the psychological strain. You're starting to understand why someone might whisper prayers with each hammer strike, or leave offerings to Saint Barbara, the patron saint of miners and quarrymen, or develop elaborate rituals around tool handling. When your life depends on metal rungs holding in stone and wooden props supporting infinite weight, you start looking for any edge you can find, even if that edge is supernatural. Your world has contracted to this wet stone cave, to the rhythm of hammer and chisel, to the cold seeping into your bones and the exhaustion building in your muscles. The midday break is still hours away. The surface feels like a distant memory, a place you visited once in another lifetime. This is your reality now. Darkness, cold water, unforgiving stone, and the constant awareness that you're surrounded by millions of pounds of geological formation that's only staying put through a combination of physics and luck. And you're not entirely sure about the physics. Somewhere far above, the sun is probably rising fully now, warming the world, driving off the morning mist. Down here, the concept of sunlight feels like a fairy tale you once heard, something beautiful and impossible that couldn't possibly exist in the same universe as this flooded stone chamber. Welcome to the depths of the Medieval Quarry, where the descent just keeps going, and every level down strips away another layer of hope that you'll survive this with your body and mind intact. Your hands have progressed beyond blisters into something more artistic, a landscape of raw flesh. Blood blisters that look like dark grapes, and strips of skin that peel back with each hammer grip to reveal the pink meat underneath. This is what 3 hours of continuous stonework does to human tissue, and you're not even halfway through your shift. The hammer handle, worn smooth by countless previous workers, has become an instrument of torture specifically designed to find every vulnerable spot on your palms and systematically destroy it. But you can't stop. Guillaume's quota system is beautifully simple. You extract a certain volume of usable stone per day, or you don't eat tomorrow, or possibly you don't work here anymore, which means you don't eat ever. The math is brutally straightforward. So you keep swinging that hammer, keep positioning that chisel, keep ignoring the signals your body is frantically sending about structural damage and system failures. The chisel work itself is an art form that nobody bothers teaching you properly because experienced workers are too busy trying to meet their own quotas to waste time on training. You're supposed to read the stone, identify the grain, find the natural beds and joints, understand where the rock wants to split. Limestone is sedimentary, built up in layers over millions of years when this whole area was underwater. And those layers create weaknesses you can exploit if you know what you're looking for. But in the dim lamplight of this flooded chamber, with water constantly running down the stone face and your eyes burning from dust and smoke, you're basically just hitting rock and hoping for the best. The technique, when you finally start to grasp it, involves placing your chisel at a slight angle to the stone face and striking with controlled force hard enough to bite into the rock, but not so hard that you shatter the chisel or send shock waves through the block you're trying to extract. Each strike should chip away a small fragment, and you work in lines, creating grooves that define where the stone will eventually split. It's like reverse sculpture. Instead of revealing a form trapped in the stone, you're trying to free a perfectly rectangular block from the chaos of natural rock formation. Your chisel dulls quickly against the limestone. The cutting edge that was sharp this morning is now rounded and blunted, which means each strike is less effective, which means you have to hit harder, which means more impact traveling through your already screaming arms and shoulders. Every couple of hours, you're supposed to take your chisel to the sharpening station. Grinding will operated by a boy who looks about 12 and is probably the smartest person in the quarry because he figured out how to work here without destroying his body with direct stone extraction. But getting to the sharpening station means ascending from this third-level chamber, which means climbing that vertical shaft with its slippery metal rungs, crossing the rope bridge, climbing the angled ladder, navigating the main pit, and then making the return journey. The round trip takes about 20 minutes that you don't have, so you keep working with a dull chisel, compensating with brute force, guaranteeing that you'll need to sharpen it even sooner. It's a vicious cycle, and you're trapped in it like everyone else down here. The stone dust is everywhere, and you're beginning to understand that it's not just an annoyance, it's a slow-acting poison that's been given free access to your respiratory system. Every breath draws it in. Fine particles that are small enough to bypass your body's natural defenses and embed themselves deep in your lung tissue. You can feel it accumulating, coating the inside of your throat and airways with a gritty paste that no amount of spitting or coughing can clear. The other workers have all developed this distinctive hack. A wet, productive cough that brings up gray-streaked phlegm, and you've joined the chorus, adding your own coughing fits to the symphony of respiratory distress echoing through the chamber. Here's a fun fact that nobody bothered to mention during your hiring process. Quarry workers in the medieval period had some of the highest rates of what we'd now call occupational lung disease. The combination of limestone dust, lamp smoke, and dampness created perfect conditions for destroying lung tissue. Workers would develop progressive shortness of breath, chronic coughing, and eventually this condition where their lungs essentially turn to stonosilicosis, where the inhaled particles trigger scar tissue formation until the lungs lose their elasticity and ability to exchange oxygen. You've got this to look forward to, assuming you survive the more immediate hazards like falling rocks and structural failures. Your shoulders are on fire. That's the only way to describe it, like someone has replaced your deltoid muscles with burning coals and every hammer swing fans the flames. The repetitive overhead motion of quarry work, strike after strike after strike, is systematically shredding the soft tissues in your shoulder joints. Modern ergonomists would take one look at this work setup and immediately shut it down for violating about 40 different biomechanical safety principles. But this is 1320, and the prevailing attitude toward worker safety is basically, try not to die too messily because it disrupts everyone else's work. Bertrand, working a few feet away from you, has stopped to wrap his hands in strips of cloth torn from his already ragged tunic. His palms are bleeding steadily, and he's trying to create some barrier between flesh and wood. Though the cloth is soaking through almost immediately, he catches you watching and offers a grim smile that's more grimace. "First month?" he asks, and you nod. "Gets worse before it gets worse," he says, which is either a very dark joke or a very accurate prognosis. "Lost 2 fingers last year when a block shifted. Still better than what happened to Michel." You don't ask about Michel because you've learned that every quarry worker has a Michel story-some cautionary tale about a co-worker who met a spectacularly awful end. Sometimes Michel was crushed. Sometimes he fell. Sometimes a rope broke or a chain snapped or the rock face collapsed. Michel is every worker who didn't make it, a ghost that haunts every shadow and echoes in every concerning sound from the stone above. The technique for extracting a block, once you've outlined it with chisel grooves, involves wedges, those iron spikes that get driven into the grooves to create splitting pressure. You take your wedges, got 6 of them, hand-forged iron tapered to a point, and position them along the groove you've created. Then comes the delicate part. You have to drive them in evenly, moving from wedge to wedge, tapping each one a little deeper, creating uniform pressure along the entire split line. Drive one wedge too far and you'll create an uneven fracture that ruins the block. Don't drive them far enough and nothing happens except wasted effort. You start tapping the first wedge, using a smaller hammer for this delicate work, and immediately you can feel the stone responding. There's this sense of tension building in the rock, like it's gathering itself to either split cleanly or shatter catastrophically. The other workers have stopped to watch because a splitting block is always a moment of drama. It could go perfectly and produce a beautiful rectangular piece ready for finishing, or it could fracture in unexpected ways and create nothing but rubble and wasted labor. Tap, 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 moving from wedge to wedge, building pressure evenly. You can actually hear the stone complaining now. Tiny creaking sounds as the internal structure begins to fail. Your heart is pounding because you've put 3 hours of brutal work into creating this split, and if it goes wrong, those are 3 hours you'll never get back. 3 hours closer to your quota that produced nothing usable. Then it happens to sound like a rifle shot echoing through the chamber, and the block separates from the wall with a crack that you feel in your chest. For a moment it just sits there, a rectangular piece of limestone about 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 18 inches deep, weighing probably 400 pounds, freed from the stone that's held it for millions of years. You've done it. You've extracted a block. It's not pretty, the surfaces are rough and will need extensive finishing, but it's roughly the right shape and size, and it appears to be free of major fractures. Historians still argue whether medieval quarry workers felt any sense of accomplishment from their labor, or whether the conditions were so brutal that work became purely mechanical, divorced from any satisfaction or pride. You're feeling something in this moment, though you're not sure it's pride exactly. It's more like relief mixed with exhaustion and a grim satisfaction that at least this particular rock didn't defeat you. But now comes the next problem, moving it. A 400-pound block of limestone doesn't relocate itself, and you're in a flooded chamber 150 feet underground. The block needs to get to the surface, where it can be loaded onto carts and transported to the cathedral worksite. This involves a complex system of ropes, pulleys, and human muscle that would make modern safety inspectors weep into their clipboards. First, you have to get the block from the chamber wall to the vertical shaft. This involves wooden rollers, basically just rough-cut logs about 4 inches in diameter, that you position under the block. Then use iron pry bars to lever the stone onto the rollers. It's a team effort, you and Bertrand and the other worker whose name you still don't know, all coordinating to lift one edge of the block. Slip a roller underneath, then repeat on the other side. The block weighs more than all three of you combined. And if any of you slip, if the pry bar slips, if a roller shifts unexpectedly, that block will crush feet or hands or entire bodies with impartial efficiency. You manage to get it onto the rollers, and now comes the process of slowly, incrementally rolling it across the chamber floor toward the shaft. Someone pushes while someone else repositions the rear roller to the front, and the block inches forward through the standing water, creating a wake like a very slow, very heavy boat. Your back is screaming from the bent-over position required for this work, and your hands, already destroyed from hammer work, are finding new and creative ways to hurt as you grip the rough iron of the pry bar. The block reaches the shaft, and now you face the truly terrifying part, getting it up to the second level. This is done with a rope and pulley system that hangs down the shaft, a thick hemp rope running through a wooden pulley mounted at the top, with a hook on the end that you secure to chains wrapped around the block. The rope extends up through all the quarry levels to the surface, where it's attached to a windlass operated by a team of workers whose entire job is hauling blocks up from the depths. You and Bertrand wrap the chains around the block, hooking them carefully to ensure the weight is balanced. An unbalanced load will swing and rotate as it rises, smashing into the shaft walls, potentially jamming in the narrow space or snapping the rope entirely. You signal up the shaft 3 sharp whistles that echo upward, and somewhere far above, invisible workers begin cranking the windlass. The rope goes taut with a sound like a bowstring being drawn, and the block lifts from the chamber floor, water streaming from its underside. It rises slowly into the shaft, and you hold your breath because this is the moment when things go wrong, when old ropes fail under strain, when chains slip, when physics decides it's had enough of human ambition. The block ascends into the darkness of the shaft, and you can hear it occasionally scraping against the stone walls, a grinding sound that makes you wince because you know that somewhere above, workers are guiding it with poles, trying to keep it centered, risking their own bodies to protect the stone. The block disappears upward, and you're left in the chamber with nothing to show for the last 3 hours except destroyed hands, screaming shoulders, and the knowledge that you get to do this again, immediately, because one block doesn't meet the daily quota. Guillaume expects each worker to extract somewhere between 3 and 5 blocks per day, depending on the difficulty of the stone and the accessibility of the work site. You're in one of the hardest sites in the quarry, which means you're expected to hit the lower end of that range, but still 2 more blocks minimum before the day ends. You return to the wall and begin the process again. Chisel work to outline the next block, finding the beds and joints, creating the grooves that will guide the split. Your hands are barely functional at this point. Blood is mixing with stone dust on your hammer handle, creating a pink paste that's somehow making the grip even worse. Your shoulders have progressed beyond pain into this numb, distant ache that suggests important things are tearing inside the joints. Your lungs are producing sounds that would concern any physician who wasn't working in an era where bloodletting is considered cutting-edge medicine. The other workers in the chamber are engaged in their own struggles with stone. You're all part of this system, this machine that converts human bodies into cathedral blocks, and the machine is remarkably efficient at the conversion. Every worker down here is being slowly ground down, their physical capacity depleted, their health destroyed, all to produce building materials for structures they'll never see completed, for the greater glory of God and the architectural ambitions of people who will never set foot in a quarry. There's a rhythm you fall into after a while, a kind of meditation born from repetition and exhaustion. Strike the chisel. Reposition. Strike again. Your mind starts to drift, disconnecting from the immediate reality of pain and cold and darkness. You think about the surface world, about the sun that's up there somewhere. You think about food. The midday meal is still hours away, but you fantasize about it anyway, about bread that isn't rock hard, about ale that might wash some of this dust from your throat. You think about sleep, about lying down somewhere that isn't damp stone, about closing your eyes without the fear that you won't wake up because the ceiling collapsed while you rested. The lamplight flickers, running low on oil, and Bertrand has to pause his work to refill it from a small cask in the corner of the chamber. The flame dips and nearly dies before catching again, and in that moment of near darkness, you're reminded of how fragile everything down here is. Safety, life itself, all balanced on the edge of failure. You strike your chisel again, and a larger chip flies off than you intended, and you freeze, examining the stone to see if you've created a fracture that will ruin the block. But no, it's fine, just a slightly deeper cut than planned. You breathe again and continue the work. Continue the systematic destruction of your body in service of extracting stone from the earth. This is hour 4 of 14, and you're already wondering if you'll make it to hour 5. You're beginning to understand that the quarry has a hierarchy as rigid and unforgiving as the stone itself, and your position in it is roughly equivalent to the mud at the bottom of these flooded chambers necessary for the ecosystem, perhaps, but utterly expendable. The social structure of this operation is a pyramid, and you're discovering that being at the bottom means absorbing pressure from every direction while having absolutely no authority to push back. At the top sits Guillaume, the master quarryman, who answers only to the cathedral's master mason and the merchant contractors who've commissioned this stone. Guillaume has the power of life and death down here, not officially, but practically decides who works where, who gets the safer positions, who gets fed when rations run short, and most importantly, who gets blamed when quotas aren't met. You've seen him strike workers with his walking stick for moving too slowly, and nobody protests because protesting means unemployment, which means starvation. He's lost those 2 fingers and probably a few other body parts over his 20 years in the quarries, and that suffering has curdled into a kind of casual cruelty toward everyone beneath him. Just below Guillaume are the skilled stone-cuttersmen who've survived long enough to develop actual expertise in reading stone and making precise cuts. These are the workers who get to operate on the surface or in the larger, safer galleries, doing the finishing work that transforms rough blocks into precisely measured pieces ready for the masons. They have their own tools, sometimes their own apprentices, and they look at laborers like you with a mixture of pity and contempt, like you're a different species that simply hasn't evolved the necessary survival traits. One of them, a man named Raoul who has maybe 8 teeth left in his head, actually laughed this morning when he saw your bleeding hands, offering the helpful advice that you'll toughen up or die. Probably die, though. Then there are the regular quarrymen experienced extractors like Bertrand and Arnaud who've been doing this long enough to know the techniques but not long enough to escape to better positions. They're the backbone of the operation, meeting quotas consistently, training new workers when they have the energy, and quietly dying from accumulated injuries and lung disease. They exist in this strange middle space where they're valuable enough to keep alive but not valuable enough to protect from the worst hazards. Arnaud told you earlier, during a brief rest, that he's been working quarries for 7 years and has maybe 3 years left before his body completely fails, and he said it with the same tone someone might use to describe the weather. At the bottom, with you, are the day laborers and the desperate men fleeing debt, running from failed harvests, escaping legal troubles, or simply born into such poverty that even this nightmare looks like opportunity. You're the expendable workforce, the bodies that can be thrown at the hardest, most dangerous tasks because replacing you is easier than training you properly. When a new shaft needs to be opened in uncertain stone, day laborers go first. When a questionable ceiling needs to be worked under, day laborers do the work. When someone needs to descend into flooded chambers via rope bridges and vertical shafts, well, you know how that goes. There's also a parallel hierarchy based on the type of work, and you're learning this through painful observation. The wedgemen, who specialize in splitting stone along its natural planes, have higher status than hammer and chisel workers. The chainmen, who secure blocks for lifting, are considered more skilled than simple extractors. The windlass operators on the surface, the ones who haul blocks up from the depths, have it relatively easy, though their hands develop calluses like leather from the rope work, and shoulder dislocations are common when a block shifts unexpectedly and the rope jerks with enough force to pop joints out of their sockets. Then there are the specialists who exist slightly outside the normal hierarchy. The rope maker, for instance, who maintains and replaces the hemp ropes that everyone's life depends on has status because everyone knows that bad rope means death. And keeping him happy means he might give your work site the newer, stronger ropes instead of the frayed ones that are one shift away from catastrophic failure. The toolsmith who repairs and sharpens implements wields power through scarcity if he decides he doesn't like you. Your chisel might not get sharpened as often, which means you work harder for less result, which means you don't meet quota, which means you don't eat. The boy working the sharpening wheel UV learned his name is Thomas, and he's 14, though he looks about 11 due to malnutrition, has somehow carved out a position of relative safety by being useful without being directly involved in extraction. He sharpens tools, runs messages between work sites, and occasionally assists with the easier tasks like sorting rubble. He's smart enough to know that the moment he's old enough to be considered a full worker, he'll be sent down into the pits like everyone else, so he's trying to develop specialized skills that will keep him on the surface. You admire his strategy while simultaneously resenting that a 14-year-old has figured out survival tactics that completely eluded you. Historians still argue whether medieval labor systems created genuine solidarity among workers or whether the competition for survival fragmented any potential unity. You're seeing both dynamics play out simultaneously down here. On one hand, workers help each other constantly. Bertrand showing you technique, Arnaud warning you about unstable rock. Even Raoul the gap-toothed stonecutter occasionally offering advice between insults. There's a recognition that you're all trapped in this together, that today's helper might be tomorrow's lifesaver when a rope fails or a ceiling cracks. But there's also vicious competition. Limited food means workers eye each other's rations jealously. The easier work sites are assigned based on Guillaume's favor, which means workers undercut each other, report each other's mistakes, and generally behave like crabs in a bucket, pulling down anyone who might be climbing out. You've already witnessed 2 workers almost come to blows over who had rights to a particular section of stone face, and Guillaume had to intervene with threats of dismissal to both parties. The threat worked because both men immediately backed down. Losing this job, horrible as it is, still means losing the ability to survive. There's an ethnic dimension to the hierarchy too that's becoming apparent. The local workersmen from the surrounding villages who speak the regional dialect have a slight advantage in terms of better work assignments and relationships with Guillaume. Then there are workers like you, from farther away, maybe speaking slightly different dialects, definitely lacking the local connections that might translate to better treatment. And at the very bottom are the itinerant workers, the wanderers who show up desperate for any employment, often lasting only days before the work breaks them or they flee in the night. You've seen 3 of these ghost workers come and go in your 3 weeks here, and you're starting to understand that you're only a few missed quotas away from joining their ranks. The gender hierarchy is absolute. This is exclusively male work, brutally physical in ways that medieval society has decided only men can handle, though you suspect women could endure this horror just as well if given the chance, or perhaps more accurately, if cursed with the necessity. The only women you see are occasionally bringing food to the work sites, and they're wives or daughters of workers, and they look at the quarry with the haunted knowledge that this place is slowly killing their husbands and fathers and sons. Payment structure reinforces the hierarchy in predictable ways. Guillaume probably earns enough to live comfortably by medieval standards: a house, regular meals, maybe even savings. The skilled stonecutters earn enough to survive with some security, assuming they don't have large families. The regular quarrymen like Bertrand earn just enough to eat and maintain shelter, with nothing left over for emergencies or old age. And you, at the bottom, earn subsistence wages paid partly in food, partly in actual coin that's barely enough to cover your shared sleeping space and occasional necessities like replacement clothing when your current rags literally disintegrate. There's also this unofficial economy of favors and bribes that greases the hierarchy. Workers slip the toolkeeper extra bread to get better implements. Someone shares his ale ration with the rope maker to ensure good materials for his work site. Guillaume is known to accept gifts in exchange for assigning workers to safer positions, though of course it's never stated that explicitly. It's just understood that generous workers tend to spend less time in flooded third-level chambers and more time on surface finishing work. The apprenticeship system exists here too, though it's informal and brutal. Young boys like Thomas are supposed to learn the trade by watching and assisting, gradually taking on more responsibility until they're full quarrymen. But there's no formal training, no safety instruction, no gradual introduction to danger. You learn by doing, and if the doing kills you, well, that's just efficient elimination of those who weren't suited for the work anyway. Thomas is learning tool maintenance, which is smart. Other boys are learning extraction techniques by working alongside their fathers or uncles, inheriting both the trade and the lung disease that comes with it. You're currently working next to a quarryman named Hugh, who represents the middle tier of the hierarchy, experienced enough to be valuable, broken enough to be bitter. Hugh has been extracting stone for 12 years, and his body is a testament to the cumulative damage of the trade. He walks with a pronounced limp from a badly healed leg fracture. His right hand is missing the pinky and ring fingers, taken by a chain accident 3 years ago. His breathing sounds like whined through a broken flute, wet and rattling, the signature sound of advanced quarry lung. And yet he's here, swinging his hammer with the resigned efficiency of someone who knows this will kill him but hasn't figured out any alternatives. Hugh is teaching you, in his way, by occasionally grunting corrections when you do something particularly stupid. Not there. You fool, can't you see the iron staining? That stone's weak. Or angle your chisel more, or you'll just be dulling it for nothing. His instruction style is roughly 70% insults and 30% actual information, but you're grateful for it because it's more training than most new workers receive. You're learning that the quarry doesn't care about your ignorance. Stone doesn't become more forgiving just because you don't know what you're doing. The social dynamics shift depending on the work site. Down here in the third-level chamber, there's almost a camaraderie born from shared misery, all suffering equally, so there's less competition and more mutual support. But on the surface, where Guillaume watches constantly and the better positions are visible and desirable, workers circle each other like suspicious dogs, looking for advantages and weaknesses. You've heard that some quarries have even more brutal hierarchies, with crew bosses who take percentages of workers' pay, or systems where experienced workers literally own the labor of apprentices they've trained. There's a particular kind of veteran worker who's evolved a survival strategy you're beginning to recognize. They work just hard enough to avoid Guillaume's wrath, but never so hard that they injure themselves. They've calculated the minimum viable effort, the sweet spot between unemployment and disability, and they guard that knowledge jealously because their continued survival depends on it. Arnaud is one of these. You've noticed he takes slightly longer breaks, positions his body more carefully, uses technique to minimize effort in ways that the desperate, quota-chasing workers don't. He'll probably outlast most of his peers simply by refusing to destroy himself for marginal productivity gains. The hierarchy also determines who gets blamed when things go wrong. A block splits badly? If a day laborer was working it, obviously it's his fault for poor technique. If a skilled worker was working it, it's the stone's fault for having hidden flaws. A rope breaks and a block falls? If it kills a laborer, it's an unfortunate accident. If it kills a skilled cutter, suddenly it's a scandal and someone needs to be held accountable, probably the rope maker or some convenient scapegoat from the lower ranks. You're learning to navigate this system, developing the survival instincts that might keep you alive and employed. You defer to everyone because you're at the bottom and have no choice. You accept corrections without argument, even when they're delivered with contempt. You volunteer for the worst tasks before being assigned to them, because volunteering at least creates the illusion that you're a willing participant rather than a victim. You share your meager rations when asked because building small debts of gratitude might matter when someone needs to decide whether to throw you a rope or let you fall. But you're also realizing that this hierarchy is designed to prevent collective action. By fragmenting workers into competing tiers, by creating small advantages and disadvantages, by making everyone's position precarious enough that they'll sacrifice others to preserve themselves, the system ensures that workers never unite to demand better conditions. You're all too busy trying not to drown to organize a resistance to the flood. Guillaume appears at the chamber entrance, having crossed the rope bridge with his usual unsettling ease, and he's inspecting the work with eyes that miss nothing. He walks to your section, examines the block you're working on, and grunts something that might be approval or might be indigestion. Then he points at Hugh. You're behind quota. Need 2 more blocks before sunset or you're out. Hugh just nods, doesn't argue, doesn't protest the impossibility of extracting 2 blocks in the remaining time. He knows the hierarchy, knows his place in it, knows that arguing with Guillaume is like arguing with the stone, pointless and potentially dangerous. You watch this interaction and understand that someday soon, that will be you receiving the impossible demand, the threat disguised as expectation. And you'll nod just like Hugh, accept it just like Hugh, and destroy yourself trying to meet it just like Hugh, because the alternative is unemployment and starvation, And at least here, at the bottom of this flooded chamber, you're still breathing, still surviving, still clinging to the lowest rung of this ladder that leads nowhere but keeps you out of the abyss. For now, the midday bell finally rings a distant, muffled sound that filters down through 150 feet of rock and rope bridges and vertical shafts to reach your flooded chamber like a rumor of salvation. You've been working for approximately 6 hours, which feels like 6 years, and your body has compiled a comprehensive list of complaints that it's now submitting all at once. Every muscle is screaming. Your hands are beyond pain into some transcendent state where they're just abstract concepts of hands, meat-wrapped bone that happens to be attached to your arms. Your lungs are producing sounds that would make a tubercular patient feel relatively healthy. The ascent to the surface for the meal break is its own special form of torture because you have to climb using muscles that have already been pushed far beyond their design limits. The vertical shaft's metal rungs feel slippery with your bloody urine leaving crimson smears on the iron as you climb, which would be concerning if you had any concern left to give. Your arms are shaking so badly that twice you nearly lose your grip, and only some primitive survival instinct keeps your fingers locked around the rungs while your feet probe blindly for the next step up. You emerge from the shaft into the second-level gallery, and even this dim lamplight feels bright after the absolute darkness of the chamber below. The rope bridge awaits, still swaying gently, still terrifying, but you're too exhausted to properly appreciate the danger anymore. You just shuffle across, one foot in front of the other, and if you fall, at least you won't have to climb any more ladders. The universe declines your unspoken offer of death, and you make it across to begin the angled ladder climb to the main pit level. By the time you reach the actual surface, with actual sky above instead of rockery gasping like a landed fish, and your vision is doing this interesting tunneling effect where everything except the immediate ground in front of you has gone fuzzy and dark. You collapse onto the grass near the quarry edge, and the sensation of soft vegetation instead of hard stone is so foreign that for a moment you can't process it. Other workers are emerging from various quarry depths, all looking equally destroyed, all moving with the careful deliberation of people whose bodies are one wrong movement away from complete rebellion. The food situation is about what you'd expect from an operation that views workers as slightly more valuable than the wooden tools they use, which is to say, barely adequate for continued survival. There's a large pot of pottage that's been sitting over a fire since early morning, a thick gruel made from whatever grains were cheapest at market, probably some beans, possibly some vegetables that were too wilted to sell elsewhere, and allegedly some meat, though you've yet to encounter actual evidence of animal protein in your portion. The smell is not encouraging, it's the olfactory equivalent of beige, a scent that suggests nutrition without promising anything resembling flavor. You're handed a wooden bowl, the same bowl you were issued on your first day, which you're responsible for keeping and cleaning, and which you rinse occasionally in whatever questionable water source is available. The pottage that gets ladled into your bowl is thick enough to support a spoon upright, which is either a testament to its hardiness or evidence that it's achieved a state of matter somewhere between liquid and solid. You find a spot on the ground, sitting with your back against a cart wheel, and begin the process of consuming enough calories to survive the afternoon shift. The first few bites are always the hardest because your body is simultaneously ravenous and revolted. You're hungry enough to eat the bowl itself, but the pottage has this grainy texture and a flavor profile that tastes like wet grain with undertones of disappointment. You force it down anyway, mechanically spooning the stuff into your mouth, chewing when necessary, swallowing and trying not to think too hard about what you're eating. Protein is protein. Calories are calories. This isn't about enjoyment, it's about fuel. Historians still argue whether medieval workers received adequate nutrition for the physical demands of their labor, and you can now contribute a definitive answer to that scholarly debate. Absolutely not. Not even close. Not by any reasonable standard. The amount of energy you're expending in the quarry far exceeds what this thin pottage can replace. You're running a caloric deficit that will, over time, consume your body from the inside. Your muscles will start breaking down. Your immune system will weaken, and you'll become increasingly susceptible to every disease and infection that medieval Europe has to offer, which is quite a selection. There's bread too, distributed in chunks that have achieved a state of hardness that makes them suitable for construction purposes. This is yesterday's bread, or possibly last week's bread. It's difficult to tell because medieval bread dating techniques are not sophisticated. You have to dunk it in the pottage to soften it enough to bite, and even then, you're basically gumming it into submission. But it's calories, and it fills your stomach with something besides stone dust, so you persist. The ale ration is the highlight of the meal, and that should tell you everything about the quality of the food. Each worker gets a small wooden cup of weak ale beer so thin you can practically see through it, with an alcohol content that's probably hovering around 2%. Just enough to kill some of the bacteria in the water it's made from, but not enough to actually get you drunk. In a world where water sources are frequently contaminated, weak ale is often safer to drink than water, which is a depressing fact about medieval public health. You drain your cup in a few gulps, savoring the slight yeasty flavor, and immediately wish you had more. Around you, other workers are engaged in various lunch activities. Some are eating in exhausted silence, just mechanically refueling. Others are attending to injuries, wrapping bloody hands, examining bruises, poking at swollen joints to assess the damage. One worker has removed his shoe to reveal a foot that's turned an alarming shade of purple-black, probably from a dropped stone this morning, and he's trying to determine whether it's broken or just badly bruised. His diagnostic technique involves wiggling his toes and wincing, which is about as sophisticated as medieval workplace medicine gets. A few workers are sleeping, or trying to sleep. The VE just collapsed where they stood and are grabbing whatever rest they can during this brief break. Their bodies have made the calculation that sleep is more valuable than food right now, which tells you something about their level of exhaustion. You understand the impulse. Your own eyelids are heavy, and the thought of lying down on this grass and just not moving for a while is almost unbearably appealing. But there's also a social element to the meal break that you're beginning to recognize as important. This is when information circulates, when workers share warnings about unsafe conditions, when you learn which sections of the quarry are producing good stone easily and which are turning into nightmares of hard rock and bad fractures. Bertrand is talking with a group of workers from the eastern pit, and you catch fragments of their conversation. Ceiling prop cracked this morning. Sounded like lightning. Guillaume's in a foul mood. Someone shorted a block count. Heard the cathedrals behind schedule. Might need to increase quotas. That last bit of news sends a ripple of quiet dread through the nearby workers. Increased quotas mean even more impossible demands. Even more pressure to work faster in conditions that are already maximally dangerous. It means more injuries, more deaths, more bodies used up and discarded in the service of architectural ambition. But nobody protests because what would be the point? The cathedral doesn't negotiate with its supply chain. The stone keeps flowing or the workers get replaced. You're attempting to unwrap the cloth strips from your hands to examine the damage. and the fabric has stuck to the wounds, dried blood acting like adhesive. Peeling it away feels like removing a layer of skin which, to be fair, you might be doing, and reveals palms that look like raw meat. The blisters have mostly popped, leaving behind weeping sores. There are splinters embedded in the flesh from the wooden tool handles, dark lines under the skin that will probably fester if you don't do something about them. You pick at one splinter with your thumbnail, trying to work it out, but your hands are shaking too much for fine motor control. An older worker, you don't know, a man with a face like weathered leather and eyes that have seen too many of these injuries, wanders over and looks at your hands without being asked. New? He asks, and you nod. He grunts and produces a small clay jar from somewhere in his clothing. Rendered fat mixed with yarrow and honey. Helps some. He hands you the jar, and you stare at it like he's just offered you a bar of gold. Medieval medical treatment for quarry workers is essentially non-existent. You're expected to manage your own injuries with whatever folk remedies are available, and this jar of greasy herbal paste is apparently the height of available care. You scoop some of the paste out. It smells like old mutton mixed with flowers and sweetness, and smear it across your palms. The initial contact burns like you've thrust your hands into a fire, and you have to clench your teeth to avoid crying out. But then, slowly, the burning fades into something almost soothing, or at least less agonizing than the raw exposure to air. The older worker nods approvingly. Keep it. You'll need it again tomorrow, and the day after, and probably every day until your hands either toughen up or fall off. He delivers this cheerful prognosis and wanders away, his good deed for the day completed. You're rewrapping your hands with fresh cloth strips torn from the hem of your tunic, which is getting shorter and more ragged by the day, when you notice Guillaume making his rounds of the meal area. He's carrying a stick, which he uses sometimes as a walking aid and sometimes as a motivational tool applied to workers' backs and shoulders. And he's conducting what appears to be a performance review. He stops at different workers, examines their conditions, makes pronouncements about afternoon assignments. You see him point one limping worker toward the lighter surface tasks, which seems merciful until you realize it probably means that workers' quota will be increased since he's being given an easier assignment. Guillaume reaches your position and looks down at you with an expression that suggests he's evaluating a horse at market and finding it wanting. You, third level, Eastern Chamber, afternoon shift. Your heart sinks because you know the Eastern Chamber, it's where they're opening a new extraction phase, which means unknown rock conditions, possibly unstable ceiling. Definitely harder work than the Western Chamber you were in this morning. But you nod, because what else can you do? Arguing with Guillaume is like arguing with weather, pointless and likely to make your situation worse. And get your quota up, Guillaume adds, almost as an afterthought. You're 2 blocks behind for the week. I need 4 blocks from you this afternoon, or you're sleeping hungry tonight. He taps his stick against your shoulder, not hard enough to be a beating, but hard enough to be a threat, and moves on to terrorize the next worker. 4 blocks, in roughly 6 hours, from a new chamber with unknown conditions, using hands that are essentially open wounds and arms that feel like they've been removed, beaten with hammers, and crudely reattached. The mathematics of this demand are simple. It's nearly impossible. But impossible is just the baseline expectation in the quarry. You've seen workers achieve impossible things through sheer desperation and the grinding application of will against stone. You've also seen workers fail and face the consequences: reduced rations, dismissal, or in one case that you heard about, a beating that left a man unable to work for days, which of course meant no pay, which meant his family starved. The meal break is nearly over. You can feel it in the way workers are reluctantly getting to their feet, rewrapping injuries, collecting tools, preparing for the afternoon descent. The sun is high overhead now, probably around 1 in the afternoon by your estimation, and it's warm up here on the surface. Down in the flooded chambers, it will still be cold and dark and damp, but at least you've had this brief moment in the light, this reminder that a world exists beyond the stone. You're struggling to your feet when you notice Thomas, the teenage boy who works the sharpening wheel, approaching with your chisel. He's sharpened it during the break. You didn't even ask, which means someone, probably Bertrand or Arnaud, arranged it as a favor. The chisel edge gleams in the sunlight, fresh and sharp, ready to be dulled again by limestone. Eastern Chamber's tricky stone, Thomas says quietly, handing you the tool. Iron heavy in places. You'll need to sharpen twice before sunset. Probably. Try to come up around mid-afternoon. This is kindness, or at least the quarry's version of kindness, practical information delivered without sentiment, help offered without expectation of thanks. You nod at Thomas, taking the chisel, and he's already moving away to deliver other sharpened tools. The kid understands the quarry's economy of favors and information, probably better than you do, and he's building relationships that might keep him alive when he inevitably ages into full quarry work. The descent bell rings, Guillaume's signal that the break is over, that it's time to return to the pit. Workers begin the familiar trudge back toward the quarry edge, back toward the ladders and rope bridges and vertical shafts, back toward the stone that will slowly kill them over years or quickly kill them in moments. You join the procession, your body already protesting the prospect of more labor, your mind trying to calculate how you'll possibly extract 4 blocks from an unknown chamber in the remaining hours. Your stomach is full, or at least fuller than it was, though full is a relative term when you're running a constant caloric deficit. The pottage sits heavy and uncomfortable in your gut, and you know from experience that within an hour of heavy work, you'll be fighting nausea as your body tries to decide whether digestion or muscle function is more important. The ale has provided a mild buzz, just enough to take the edge off the pain, but not enough to actually impair you, which is probably intentional. Guillaume needs workers functional, not drunk. As you approach the quarry edge, you take one last look at the sky, at the clouds drifting across the blue expanse, at the sun that you won't see again until the evening bell releases you. It's a beautiful day up here, probably warm and pleasant for the farmers working nearby fields, for the merchants traveling the roads, for anyone whose life doesn't involve descending into the earth to wrestle stone from its ancient resting place. Then you start down the ladder, and the light fades, and the familiar cold dampness of the quarry envelopes you like an unwelcome embrace, and you're back in the world of stone and dust and grinding labor where the afternoon shift awaits with its impossible demands and inevitable suffering. For blocks, Eastern Chamber, unknown conditions. You've got approximately 6 hours to achieve the impossible or face the consequences, and your destroyed hands and screaming shoulders and dust-filled lungs are along for the ride whether they like it or not. The Eastern Chamber turns out to be every bit the nightmare you anticipated, with bonus features you couldn't have imagined in your worst fever dreams. You arrive after the now familiar descent ladders, rope bridge, vertical shafto. Find a space that's less chamber and more geological insult to human ambition. The ceiling here is lower, maybe 6 feet at its highest point, forcing you to work in a perpetual crouch that immediately sets your lower back on fire. The floor is more water than stone, pools deep enough to swallow your legs to mid-calf, and the water is cold enough to make your bones ache within minutes. But the real problem is the stone itself. Thomas was right about the iron content. You can see it streaking through the limestone in rust-colored veins, and you know from bitter experience that iron deposits make the rock harder, more unpredictable, prone to shattering instead of splitting cleanly. This is stone that doesn't want to be extracted. Stone that will fight you for every inch. Stone that will dull your freshly sharpened chisel in a fraction of the time it would take in cleaner limestone. You're working alone here, which is both a blessing and a curse. Blessing because you don't have to coordinate with anyone or share the limited dry space. Curse because when something goes wrong, not if there's nobody to help, nobody to witness, nobody to pull you out if you get trapped under a fall or pinned by a shifted block. Guillaume has assigned you this solo posting because you're expendable, because the Eastern Chamber needs to start producing and he'd rather risk one new worker than pull experienced men from their proven sites. You position yourself in front of a section of wall that looks marginally more promising than the restless iron staining. What might be a decent bedding plane running horizontally through the rock. You place your chisel and raise your hammer, and the first strike sends a shock wave through your arms that makes your previous pain seem quaint by comparison. Your hands, even wrapped and greased with that herbal paste, are essentially tenderized meat at this point, and every impact is a fresh negotiation with agony. The stone chips away reluctantly, begrudgingly, like it's personally offended by your attempts to extract it. Where the Western Chamber's limestone yielded to steady pressure, this Eastern stone requires violence. You have to strike harder, more repeatedly, and each strike is less effective than it would be in better rock. You're burning energy at an alarming rate, and you can feel your body starting to make desperate calculations about which systems to shut down to conserve resources. About 30 minutes in, you hit a pocket of especially iron-rich stone, and your chisel literally bounces off it, the impact traveling back through the tool, up your arms, and resonating in your teeth. You examine the chisel edge, already showing signs of dulling, small chips appearing in the formerly sharp blade. At this rate, you'll need to surface for sharpening within the hour, and every trip to the surface is time not spent extracting stone. Time you can't afford when you're chasing an impossible quota. The water situation is becoming critical. You're standing in it, kneeling in it, can't avoid it. Your clothes are soaked through, and medieval fabric has this wonderful property where it becomes heavier and more restrictive when wet, like you're wearing a suit made of cold, clingy misery. Your feet have gone numb, which is almost a blessing because you suspect if you could feel them properly, you'd be in even more distress. But numbness brings its own dangers. You can't feel where you're stepping, can't sense when you're about to slip on submerged stone, can't tell if you're developing the kind of foot damage that leads to infections and amputations. Historians still argue whether medieval workers understood the connection between prolonged cold water exposure and serious health complications, or whether they simply accepted that swollen, infected feet were just part of quarry work. You're developing a real-time education in exactly how water destroys flesh. The skin on your feet is probably pruning, softening, becoming vulnerable to every sharp edge and bacterial invasion. Trench foot won't be formally identified for another 6 centuries, but you're well on your way to experiencing the medieval version. You've managed to outline your first block kit took twice as long as it should have due to the difficult stone, and now comes the wedge work. You position your iron wedges along the groove you've created, and you start the careful process of driving them in evenly. But the iron deposits in the stone are creating unexpected resistance points, and when you tap one wedge, you can feel the stone responding incorrectly, stress building in unpredictable ways. You're midway through the wedging process when you hear a sound that makes your blood freeze colder than the water you're standing in. It's a crack, sharp and clear, but it's not coming from your block. It's coming from above, from the ceiling, from the wooden props that are theoretically holding up several thousand tons of rock. You stop immediately, wedge hammer frozen in mid-swing, and listen with every fiber of your being. The sound doesn't repeat immediately, but you can hear something creaking, a subtle groan of wood under impossible strain. One of the ceiling props is failing, or thinking about failing, and you're alone in here with no backup support and no clear path to safety if things go catastrophic. Your eyes scan the ceiling in the dim lamplight, trying to identify which prop is the problem, trying to assess how much time you might have if it gives way. There may be 10 feet from your position. You can see a prop that's visibly bowing, the wood grain showing stress fractures, the whole structure bent in a curve that looks like a drawn bow. The weight of the ceiling is concentrating on this single point of failure, and you're watching in real time as medieval engineering reaches its breaking point. The question isn't if it will fail, the question is when, and whether you'll be out of the collapse zone when it happens. You should leave. Every survival instinct you possess is screaming at you to abandon this chamber, get across the water, reach the vertical shaft, and climb to safety. But Guillaume's words echo in your head. 4 blocks or sleep hungry. And sleeping hungry isn't just discomfort, it's your body being deprived of the calories it needs to recover from today's damage, which means tomorrow you'll be even weaker, even less capable, spiraling down toward the point where you can't meet quotas at all and you're dismissed and you're starving in a medieval landscape that has no social safety net and no compassion for failed quarry workers. So you make a calculation that would horrify anyone with functioning self-preservation. You keep working. But you work faster now, with one eye constantly on that failing prop, ready to bolt if the creaking intensifies. You drive your wedges with urgent strikes, building pressure in the stone, praying that the block splits before the ceiling comes down. Your hands are beyond pain now, operating in some autonomous mode where they simply execute the necessary motions regardless of the damage being inflicted. The block is resisting, the iron-rich stone refusing to split cleanly along the bedding plane you've identified. You're applying more force, striking the wedges harder, taking risks with the fracture pattern because you don't have time for perfect technique. And finally, mercifully, you hear the sound you've been desperate for, that rifle shot crack that means the stone is yielding. The block separates from the wall, and you immediately start the process of getting it onto rollers, moving it away from the wall, positioning it for extraction. But now you've got a 400-pound block of stone that needs to travel across 20 feet of flooded chamber floor to reach the vertical shaft, and you're doing it alone. And that ceiling prop is still groaning ominously overhead. You lever the block onto the wooden rollers, and it immediately wants to sink into the soft mud beneath the water. The rollers are barely functioning in these conditions, theory getting stuck in the mud, rotating unevenly, creating resistance instead of facilitating movement. You're behind the block, pushing with everything you have, and your feet are slipping in the underwater mud, providing almost no traction. You gain 6 inches, then a foot, then the rollers jam and you have to reposition them, lifting the massive stone with pry bars that want to slip from your destroyed hands. The water is splashing up, soaking you even more thoroughly, and you're panting from exertion. your breath coming in ragged gasps that pull stone dust and lamp smoke deep into your already compromised lungs. 15 feet to go. The ceiling prop creaks again, louder this time, and you swear you can see dust falling from the ceiling where the stone is shifting, where the weight is redistributing, where failure is imminent. 10 feet. Your muscles are running on something beyond fatigue. You've entered a state where your body is consuming itself for fuel, breaking down whatever tissues it can spare to provide the energy for just a few more pushes, just a few more feet. 5 feet from the shaft, and the prop makes a sound like a tree breaking in a storm, a sharp, splintering crack that echoes through the chamber. You abandon technique and just shove the block with desperate strength, and it slides the remaining distance on its rollers, reaching the shaft area just as you hear the prop give way completely. You don't look back, you just dive forward, rolling through the water, scrambling toward the shaft as behind you there's a sound like thunder, like the earth itself groaning. You're at the shaft entrance, looking back, and you see a section of the ceiling, maybe 8 feet square, has collapsed. Tons of rock crashing down into the space where you were working moments ago. The falling stone hits the water with a massive splash that sends a wave across the chamber, extinguishing the lamp and plunging everything into absolute darkness. Dust fills the air, thick and choking, and you can hear smaller pieces of rock still falling, the patter of debris raining down from the new hole in the ceiling. You're alive. Somehow, impossibly, you're alive. Your heart is hammering so hard you can feel it in your throat, and your hands are shaking, not from pain now, but from the adrenaline flooding your system, from the proximity to death, from the realization that you just escaped being crushed by pure luck and desperate timing. In the darkness, you can hear water dripping, stones settling, and your own ragged breathing. You need light. You need to assess the damage, to figure out if the chamber is still accessible, to determine if your block made it to the shaft intact or if it's buried under rubble. You have a flint and steel in your pocket. Every quarry worker carries fire-starting tools because lamps go out and darkness kills, and with shaking hands, you manage to strike sparks onto a piece of char cloth, coax it into a glow, and light a spare lamp wick you also carry. The flickering light reveals devastation. The ceiling collapse has created a new geography in the chamber pile of rubble where your workstation used to be. Water disturbed and murky, the whole space fundamentally altered. But your block, miraculously, is intact and positioned at the shaft. The rollers are partially buried in debris, but the stone itself is undamaged, ready to be hoisted. You attach the chains, signal up the shaft with your whistle, and watch as the block begins its ascent. Your first block from the eastern chamber, extracted at the cost of nearly being buried alive, bought with destroyed hands and overstressed joints and a close encounter with catastrophic ceiling failure. 1 block. 3 more to go before sunset if you want to eat tomorrow. But the chamber isn't safe anymore. The ceiling collapse has created instability. You can see cracks radiating from the collapse point, other props that are now bearing redistributed weight they weren't designed for. Working here is suicide. Even Guillaume, with his casual disregard for worker safety, would probably agree that the eastern chamber needs to be abandoned or at least heavily reinforced before extraction continues. You make the climb up the shaft, cross the rope bridge, ascend the ladders to the main pit, and find Guillaume. You explain the situation: ceiling collapse, chamber unsafe, managed to extract 1 block before the failure. You expect him to be concerned, to order the chamber closed, to perhaps assign you to a different site. Instead, Guillaume listens with an expression of mild annoyance, like you've just reported a minor inconvenience rather than a near-fatal structural failure. 1 block? He says. You've got 3 more to meet quota. Eastern chambers still producing stone. Just work around the collapse. And be more careful with the props, those timbers aren't free. You stare at him, trying to process the fact that he's sending you back into a chamber that nearly killed you minutes ago. A chamber with a partially collapsed ceiling and compromised structural supports. But of course he is. The stone must flow. The quotas must be met. Workers are replaceable. Construction schedules are not. But the ceiling, you start to protest. And Guillaume's stick comes down on your shoulder, hard enough to make your point. Eastern chamber. 3 more blocks. Or find other employment. He turns away, the conversation over, your concerns dismissed as irrelevant. You stand there, in the late afternoon sun, and understand with perfect clarity that the quarry doesn't care about your survival. Cares about stone production. You're a tool, slightly more mobile than a hammer, slightly more expensive to replace than a chisel, but fundamentally just an instrument for converting geological formations into building materials. Your fear, your pain, your reasonable objections to working in demonstrably unsafe conditions, these are just inefficiencies in the production process. Obstacles to be overcome through threats and coercion. You're going back down, because the alternative is unemployment, which is starvation, which is death anyway, just slower and with more suffering. At least in the eastern chamber, death might be quick as ceiling collapse, a crushing impact, lights out. You begin the descent again, tools in hand, back toward the flooded chamber with its collapsed ceiling and compromised props and 3 more blocks waiting to be extracted from stone that doesn't want to yield them. The afternoon sun is warm on your back for the few moments before you descend into shadow, and you try to remember that warmth because you'll need something to hold on to when you're standing in cold water under a ceiling that's actively trying to kill you. Here's something they don't tell you when you're swinging hammers in a flooded death trap chamber 150 feet underground. The stone you're destroying your body to extract is going to become something magnificent. While you're standing in freezing water with ruined hands and collapsing ceilings, master masons 3 days' journey away are creating architectural miracles with blocks that look exactly like the ones you're wrestling from the earth. The cathedral rising in distant Reims, or maybe it's Amiens, or Chartres, you're not entirely sure which project the stone is feeding will stand for centuries, inspiring awe and devotion, while your contribution will be completely forgotten, along with your name, your suffering, and the fact that you existed at all. You're back in the eastern chamber, working carefully around the rubble pile, hyper-aware of every sound the remaining ceiling props make. The second block is coming grudgingly from a section of wall that's slightly better stone, though better is relative when you're working in conditions that would make a modern safety inspector weep blood. You've developed this constant scanning pattern: strike the chisel, glance at the ceiling, reposition, strike again, check the props, repeat. It's exhausting on top of exhaustion, adding psychological strain to the physical destruction already underway. But while you work, you're thinking about where this stone goes, what it becomes. You've heard Guillaume and the more experienced workers talking about the cathedral projects, dropping details in that casual way people discuss their industry. The blocks you're extracting aren't just stone theory being transformed into flying buttresses. Those external support structures that look like frozen arches of stone leaping from the cathedral walls. They're becoming columns that soar toward vaulted ceilings, their capitals carved with leaves and figures by craftsmen whose skill makes your rough extraction work look like what it is: brutal preliminary violence against rock. Some of your stone will become window trasrithos, delicate stone frameworks that hold stained glass in intricate geometric patterns. It's almost funny, in a dark way, that stone you extracted with bleeding hands and a collapsing ceiling will be carved into flowing, organic shapes, transformed from its brutal origin into something that appears weightless and divine. The irony isn't lost on you. The heaviest, most earthbound material being used to create structures that seem to defy gravity, to reach toward heaven. Historians still argue whether medieval quarry workers took pride in their contribution to cathedral building, or whether they viewed it with the same bitter resentment that you're currently feeling. You suspect it's both. Simultaneously pride that your suffering produces something enduring, resentment that the endurance comes at such a horrific cost. The masons will sign their work, sometimes carving subtle marks into the stone. The architects will be remembered, their names recorded in documents and chronicles. But your anonymous fuel for the construction machine, as forgotten as the wooden scaffolding that will be dismantled when the cathedral is complete. The limestone you're extracting is Lutean limestone, probably from the Jurassic period, formed about 45 million years ago when this whole region was a shallow tropical sea. The stone is literally made of compressed ancient sea creatures, their shells, their skeletons, their calcium carbonate remains compressed over eons into rock. And now you're freeing it, so it can become walls and arches and columns that will define sacred space for medieval Christians who have no idea they're worshipping inside the fossilized remains of prehistoric marine life. There's something almost poetic about that transformation, though the poetry is somewhat undermined by your current situation of standing in cold water while a ceiling threatens to collapse on your head. Your second block splits cleanly, a minor miracle given the stone quality, and you begin the exhausting process of moving it to the shaft. Your body is running on fumes now, on desperation and the grim determination that comes from knowing failure means hunger. The block slides across the flooded floor more easily this time because you've learned technique, found the optimal roller placement, understood how to use the water's buoyancy instead of fighting against it. Small victories, adapted from necessity, the kind of practical knowledge that would make you a better quarryman if you survive long enough to apply it. While the block ascends the shaft, you're thinking about scale. The cathedral will require tens of thousands of blocks, maybe hundreds of thousands, each one extracted by workers like you from quarries scattered across the region. It's an industrial operation masquerading as divine inspiration, yes. The architects are drawing on sacred geometry and theological symbolism, but the actual construction is a massive coordinated effort involving supply chains, labor management, and the systematic conversion of human suffering into building materials. The flying buttresses that will use your stone serve a specific engineering function. They transfer the lateral thrust from the high vaulted ceilings down to the ground, allowing the walls to be thinner, the windows to be larger, the whole structure to reach heights that would be impossible with earlier Romanesque techniques. The master mason who designed this system probably did complex calculations, possibly using geometric models, definitely drawing on accumulated knowledge from previous cathedral projects. And all of that sophisticated engineering ultimately depends on workers like you successfully extracting stone from the earth without being killed in the process. You're starting on the third block now, and your body is sending increasingly urgent messages about system failures. Your hands have progressed beyond pain into numbness, which is concerning because numbness means nerve damage. means you're losing the fine motor control necessary for precise chisel placement. Your shoulders are making grinding sounds with each movement, bone on bone where cartilage has been compressed and damaged. Your lungs are rattling with each breath, and you're coughing up material that's definitely blood-streaked now, not just dust and phlegm. But you keep working because the alternative is unacceptable. And while you work, you're imagining the finished cathedral. You've never seen a Gothic cathedral. The closest you've come is glimpsing the old Romanesque church in your village, with its thick walls and small windows and sense of earthbound permanence. But you've heard descriptions from traveling workers, from pilgrims passing through, from Guillaume, who once traveled to see Notre Dame in Paris and came back speaking in odd tones about stone that seemed to float, about light that poured through colored glass like liquid jewels, about spaces so vast and vertical they made you feel simultaneously insignificant and connected to something infinite. Your stone will be part of that. Centuries from now, if the cathedral survives wars and weather and the simple erosion of time, people will walk through those spaces and feel what Guillaume felt. They'll look up at vaulted ceilings supported by your stone. They'll see light filtering through windows framed by your limestone. They'll experience the sacred space that your suffering helped create. And they won't think about you even for a moment, because why would they? The quarry is invisible in the finished cathedral. The blood and dust and broken bodies are edited out of the architectural narrative. There's a particular type of stone called ashlar blocks that have been precisely cut and finished to fit together with minimal mortar, creating smooth wall surfaces. Your rough-cut blocks will become ashlar after they leave the quarry, processed by stone cutters who will transform your irregular rectangles into precisely measured pieces. They'll cut away the rough surfaces, revealing the fine-grained limestone underneath, creating blocks so uniform they seem machine-made even though every surface is hand-worked. The stone cutters have their own skills, their own pride in craft, and they probably look down on quarry workers as mere laborers who lack refinement. They don't consider that without the brutal extraction work, they'd have nothing to refine. Your third block is fighting you. The stone here has a hidden flaw fracture line you didn't detect until you were halfway through the wedging process. And now the block is threatening to split incorrectly, creating an irregular shape that might be rejected as unusable. You're trying to compensate, repositioning wedges, applying pressure at different angles, attempting to guide the fracture back toward a usable geometry. It's delicate work requiring precision you barely possess anymore, with tools gripped by hands that are more wound than flesh. The fracture spreads with a sound like ice cracking on a pond, and for a moment you think you've lost it, think the block will shatter into rubble. But then it shifts, the break line redirects, and the stone separates in a shape that's ugly but probably acceptable, irregular but within the parameters of usability. You've salvaged it through luck and desperation, and you feel a grim satisfaction that's immediately overwhelmed by exhaustion. 3 blocks extracted. 1 more to go before you meet Guillaume's quota and earn the right to eat tomorrow. The light is changing above you, can sense it even down here in the depths. Some subtle shift that tells you the afternoon is advancing toward evening. You've got maybe 2 more hours before the sunset bell, 2 hours to extract 1 more block from stone that's actively hostile and a chamber that's structurally compromised. While you position yourself for the final extraction, you're thinking about the permanence of your work versus the impermanence of your existence. The cathedral will outlast you by centuries, possibly millennia if humans continue maintaining it. Your stone will weather slowly, wear gradually, but the basic structure will endure long after your body has decomposed and been completely forgotten. There's something both humbling and infuriating about that imbalance, your temporary suffering creating permanent beauty, your forgotten agony becoming eternal inspiration. The master masons, the architects, they're creating something intentional, something designed to communicate theological concepts through physical form. The height of the cathedral reaching toward heaven. The light through stained glass representing divine illumination. The flying buttresses making the impossible possible, like grace supporting the structure of faith. It's all very symbolic and meaningful, and it all depends on you standing in freezing water, breathing stone dust, risking death by ceiling collapse to free limestone from its ancient resting place. You wonder if the people who will pray in that cathedral, the nobles and merchants and peasants who will fill those spaces in years to come, will ever consider the human cost of its construction. Probably not. The finished building erases the process of its creation. The blood and dust wash away in the first rain. The suffering becomes invisible, edited out of the architectural experience. What remains is beauty and inspiration and a sense of the divine, built on a foundation of forgotten pain. Your fourth block is coming from a section of wall near the chamber entrance, about as far from the ceiling collapse as possible. The stone here is slightly betterless iron staining, clearer bedding planes, and your chisel is finding purchase more easily. But you're operating on autopilot now, your body moving through practiced motions while your mind drifts through exhaustion-induced fog. Strike, reposition, strike again. The rhythm is hypnotic, almost meditative, though the meditation is punctuated by pain signals your brain has mostly learned to ignore. You're thinking about the workers who will come after you, who will extract stone from these same chambers years from now. Will they know about the ceiling collapse you survived? Will there be any record of your narrow escape? Or will it just be another forgotten moment in the quarry's ongoing violence against human bodies? The institutional memory of a quarry is probably short. Workers die or leave. New ones arrive. The knowledge resets. Only the stone remains constant, indifferent to the parade of people who attack it with hammers and chisels. The fourth block splits beautifully, the cleanest separation you've achieved all day, and you want to laugh or cry or both at the irony that your last block, the one you're extracting on the edge of complete physical collapse, is the most perfect. The stone gods have a sense of humor. Apparently, you get the block onto rollers, begin the process of moving it to the shaft, and your body is moving through pure will now because the actual physical capacity has been exceeded hours ago. The block reaches the shaft. Chains attached. Signal whistle blown. The stone begins its ascent, and you're watching it rise into the darkness above, and you're thinking, this is it. This block will become part of something greater than itself. Greater than you, greater than this moment of suffering. It will be shaped and placed and incorporated into a structure that represents humanity's highest aspirations. Our attempt to build heaven on earth using nothing but stone and faith and the broken bodies of workers whose names no one will remember. 4 blocks. Quota met. You've survived the day, earned tomorrow's meal, bought yourself another 24 hours of existence in this grinding system. The victory feels hollow because you know you'll have to do this again tomorrow, and the day after, until your body fails completely or the cathedral project ends or you find some escape that currently seems impossible. You begin the ascent from the eastern chamber for what you hope is the last time today, climbing the vertical shaft with arms that barely function, crossing the rope bridge on legs that shake with each step, ascending ladder after ladder toward the surface and the evening bell and the promise of rest that will be far too brief and inadequate for the recovery your body desperately needs. The sunset bell rings while you're still halfway up the final ladder, and the sound fills you with a relief so profound it's almost painful. You've made it. Somehow, impossibly, you've survived 14 hours of medieval quarry work, the descents into flooded chambers, the ceiling collapse, the impossible quota, the systematic destruction of your hands and shoulders and lungs. You're still alive, still employed, still clinging to the lowest rung of survival. The victory feels Pyrrhic, like you've won a battle but guaranteed you'll have to fight the same war tomorrow. But right now, in this moment, you'll take it. You emerge from the pit into the early evening light, and the world has transformed during your underground hours. The sun is low on the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and gold, and the temperature has dropped enough that the air feels crisp against your sweat-soaked, dust-caked skin. Other workers are emerging too, a ragged procession of exhausted men climbing from various pit levels, all moving with the careful deliberation of people whose bodies are one wrong step from complete failure. But the day isn't over. Not really. Because Guillaume is standing near the tool collection point, and he's got that look on his face that means there's more work ahead. And your heart sinks even as your body screams in protest at the very concept of continued labor. He's pointing at various workers, assigning them to end-of-day tasks that apparently don't count as actual work despite requiring physical effort. It's the quarry's special form of cruelty ve completed your impossible quota, but before you can leave, there are maintenance duties, cleanup tasks, preparations for tomorrow that need to happen on your time, without compensation, because that's just how this system functions. Guillaume points at you, and you want to weep. Block inspection duty. 20 blocks in the staging area need checking for fractures before they get loaded for transport tomorrow. He's already moving on to assign other workers to their after-hours duty assumptions repairing ladder rungs. Someone else is redistributing tools. A whole crew is reinforcing a ceiling prop in the western gallery. The quarry keeps extracting labor even after the official work period ends, squeezing every possible moment of productivity from bodies that have nothing left to give. The staging area is on the surface, at least, so you won't have to descend again. It's a relatively flat section of ground near the quarry where finished blocks are arranged in rows, waiting for the ox carts that will transport them to the cathedral worksite. Your job is to examine each block for cracks, fissures, or structural weaknesses that might make them unsuitable for construction. This quality control, basically, and it's important work because a flawed block incorporated into a cathedral could compromise the entire structure. But it's also work that requires you to crouch, bend, run your hands over rough stone surfaces, and use visual acuity that you barely possess after 14 hours of dim lamplight and stone dust. You approach the first block, a rectangular piece of limestone about 3 feet long, beautifully cut, probably from one of the better surface galleries. You run your destroyed hands over its surface, feeling for irregularities, looking for the telltale lines that indicate fractures. Your hands are so damaged that you can barely feel the stone texture, and your eyes are burning and blurry from dust. But you're trying, going through the motions because the alternative is Guillaume's stick across your shoulders and possibly dismissal. The block seems finino obvious cracks. No structural issues. You move to the next one, and the next, conducting inspections that are probably inadequate but are the best you can manage in your current state. Some blocks show clear problems. Fracture lines running through the middle, sections where the stone has split along unexpected planes, areas where iron deposits have created weakness. You mark these with a piece of chalk, a big X on the top surface that indicates they need to be set aside for secondary uses or possibly just broken up for rubble. Historians still argue whether medieval quality control for building materials was as rigorous as modern standards, and based on your current inspection technique, the answer is almost certainly no. You're barely functional, conducting examinations that would fail any legitimate quality assurance process. But this is apparently acceptable in a system where worker expertise is built through survival rather than training. The blocks that pass your inspection will become parts of a cathedral, and you have to hope that your exhaustion-impaired judgment isn't a proving stone that will fail structurally in years to come. Around you, other workers are engaged in their after-hours tasks. A team is repairing the rope bridge to the second level. One of the support ropes has developed a frayed section that apparently became concerning enough to warrant immediate attention. Never mind that workers have been crossing it all day. They're up on ladders, working with the rope while the bridge sways beneath them, and you're watching them work while simultaneously inspecting blocks. And you're thinking about how this never stops, how the quarry's demands are infinite and the workers' capacity is decidedly finite. Someone has started a fire in a barrel near the staging area, partly for light as dusk deepens, partly for warmth because the evening air is getting cold and everyone is soaked through from quarry water. Workers are gravitating toward the fire when their tasks allow, holding out damaged hands toward the flames, trying to drive some warmth back into bodies that have been systematically chilled over the course of the day. You finish inspecting a block and drift toward the fire yourself, just for a moment, just to feel heat that isn't generated by muscle exertion and pain. The warmth feels incredible, almost narcotic in its effect. Your hands, held near the flames, start to thaw, and with the thawing comes fresh pain as nerve endings wake up and report the full extent of the damage. You can see your hands clearly in the firelight. Theory: a disaster. Meat and blood and exposed tissue wrapped in filthy cloth strips that are doing more harm than good at this point. You should probably clean them, apply fresh wrappings, maybe more of that herbal paste if the old worker will share again. But that requires energy and initiative that you don't possess right now. Guillaume appears near the fire, making his final rounds of the day, ensuring that all the after-hours work is progressing adequately. He stops next to you, and you brace for criticism or additional tasks, but instead he just looks at you with an expression that might be assessment or might be complete indifference. "You met quota," he says, which is probably the closest thing to praise you'll receive. "Eastern chambers closed until we can shore up that ceiling. You'll be in the Western Gallery tomorrow, second level." The Western Gallery is marginally safer than the Eastern Chamber, with a more stable ceiling and better stone quality. It's not exactly a reward. You still earned it by nearly dying today, but it's an improvement. You nod, not trusting yourself to speak, and Guillaume moves on to terrorize someone else with his presence. The workday is bleeding into evening, the official hours long past, but the labor continuing because that's how the system functions. You return to your block inspection, moving through the remaining pieces with mechanical efficiency, marking the flawed ones, approving the acceptable ones, your judgment getting worse with each passing minute of exhaustion. The last few blocks could have obvious cracks, and you might miss them. Your vision is tunneling, your concentration fragmenting, and you're operating on autopilot. Finally, mercifully, you finish the last block. The inspection duty is complete. Guillaume has moved away to oversee some other task, and there's this beautiful moment where you realize no one is watching you. No one is assigning you additional work, and the path away from the quarry is clear. Other workers are already leaving, trudging toward the village or their various sleeping arrangements, and you join the exodus, moving away from the pit on legs that feel like they're made of limestone themselves. The walk back to your shelter is about half a mile, and it feels like a journey across continents. Every step is negotiated with a body that's filing formal complaints about the day's abuse. Your feet, numb from cold water exposure, are starting to wake up, and the awakening brings sensations that range from unpleasant to alarming sharp pains, burning feelings, a sense that the skin is damaged in ways you'll discover when you finally remove your disintegrating shoes. The landscape around you is settling into dusk fields where peasants are finishing their own long work days, scattered houses showing lamp light through windows, the monastery in the distance where monks are probably singing vespers while you're limping home from a day of geological violence. The contrast between their sacred routine and your profane labor isn't lost on you. They're praying for humanity's salvation. You're providing the building materials for the church where those prayers will be offered. Different roles in the same cosmic drama, except their role doesn't destroy their bodies. You reach the lean-to shelter you share with 7 other workers, and it's exactly as miserable as you left it this morning. Straw that needs changing. The smell of unwashed bodies, the damp chill that permeates everything. But it's shelter, and you're not being asked to extract stone from the earth. So relatively speaking, it's paradise. You collapse onto your straw pile, and your body makes sounds of relief that are almost embarrassing. Around you, other workers are engaged in end-of-day rituals. Someone is attempting to wash in the communal water bucket, though wash is a generous term for splashing cold water on a dust-caked face. Someone else is examining an injury by lamplight, poking at a swollen ankle and trying to determine if it's broken or just badly bruised. The guy who sleeps next to you still don't know his name after 3 weeks is already unconscious, snoring with that distinctive rasp that means his lungs are as dust-filled as everyone else's. You should eat something. There's supposedly an evening meal for workers who can make it to the communal cooking area. More of that exciting pottage supplemented with whatever cheap provisions are available. But the thought of getting up, of walking even a short distance, of sitting upright long enough to consume food, it's too much. Your body has prioritized rest over nutrition, decided that sleep is more critical than calories, and you're too exhausted to argue with that biological decision. You're attempting to unwrap your hands one final time, to assess the damage before sleep, and the cloth strips have effectively become part of your flesh. The blood and fluid have dried, creating a bond between fabric and wound. Peeling them away is like removing skin, and you get about halfway through the process before you give up, deciding that you'll deal with it tomorrow, or never, or whenever your hands finally fall off from infection and you won't need to wrap them anymore. The shelter is filling up with returning workers, each one looking as destroyed as you feel. There's not much conversation. Everyone is too exhausted for social interaction, too focused on their own suffering to engage with anyone else's. Someone mutters something about tomorrow's work assignments. Someone else groans about a new injury. Mostly there's just the sound of exhausted men settling into uncomfortable sleeping arrangements, the rustle of straw, the creak of the shelter's wooden frame. You're lying on your back, staring at the shelter's roof-rough planks that don't quite meet, gaps showing the darkening sky beyond, and you're thinking about tomorrow. Because tomorrow is coming, inevitably, whether your body recovers or not. The bell will ring before dawn. Guillaume will be waiting at the quarry. The stone will still be buried in the earth, waiting to be extracted. The cathedral will still be under construction. demanding its supply of limestone blocks. And you'll descend into the pit again. Because what choice do you have? Your hands throb with each heartbeat. Apparently your cardiovascular system has decided that damaged tissue should receive extra blood flow, which seems counterproductive when the blood just makes everything hurt more. Your shoulders are locked in position, the joints so inflamed that you can't lift your arms above chest height. Your lungs are producing that wet, rattling sound that means the stone dust has progressed from irritant to actual pathology. Your feet are mysteries wrapped in disintegrating leather, possibly damaged beyond recovery, though you won't know until you work up the courage to look. But you're alive. You've survived day one of your medieval quarry career, though calling it a career suggests some kind of progression or advancement, when really it's just a slow degradation toward disability or death. You've met your quota, earned tomorrow's food, proven you can extract stone from the earth despite having absolutely no training or preparation. In the quarry's brutal calculus, that makes you a success. Sleep is pulling at you now, exhaustion dragging you down into unconsciousness despite the discomfort of your sleeping arrangement and the pain radiating from every part of your body. You can hear the evening sounds from outside animals settling for the night, distant voices from the village, the monastery bell marking the hour. Somewhere out there, master masons are probably sketching plans by candlelight, refining their designs for tomorrow's construction. Somewhere else, nobles are dining in heated halls, discussing the cathedral's progress without any thought for the human cost of each stone. And here, in this miserable shelter, you're drifting toward sleep with the knowledge that tomorrow will be exactly like today. The descent, the cold water, the stone that doesn't want to yield, the impossible quotas, the systematic destruction of your body in service of architectural ambition. The routine is established. The pattern is set. This is your life now, for however long your body can sustain it. Your last thought before sleep claims you is about the cathedral, about your stone becoming flying buttresses and columns and window tracery, about the permanence of that structure versus the impermanence of your suffering. In some distant future, people will marvel at the cathedral's beauty, never knowing the cost, never imagining the flooded chambers and collapsed ceilings and destroyed hands that made it possible. But for now, you sleep, because tomorrow the quarry will demand everything you have again. And rest is the only weapon you possess against its relentless appetite for human labor. The bell rings in the darkness, and for a moment, you genuinely can't remember where you are or why every part of your body is screaming in protest. Then memory floods back the quarry, the stone, the 14 hours of systematic destruction, and you understand that this wasn't a nightmare you can wake up from. This is your reality now, and the bell is calling you back to it, demanding you rise and repeat yesterday's horrors as if they were perfectly reasonable expectations for human endurance. You try to sit up, and your body outright refuses. Your muscles have seized during the night, locked into positions of pain, and moving requires a negotiation with each muscle group individually. Your shoulders won't rotate. Your back won't bend. Your hands, oh God, your hands have swollen overnight into grotesque parodies of human appendages. The fingers thick and immobile, the palms a landscape of burst blisters and inflamed tissue. The cloth wrappings you never fully removed have stuck to the wounds, and dried blood has created a crust that cracks when you finally manage to flex your fingers. Around you, other workers are going through their own painful resurrections. The communal groaning is almost musical, a chorus of suffering as bodies that were pushed beyond their limits yesterday are being asked to function again today. Someone is coughing so violently it sounds like he's trying to expel a lung. Someone else is cursing steadily, a litany of profanity directed at the quarry, at Guillaume, at God himself for creating a world where this kind of work exists. You manage to get to your feet, though feet is a generous term for what's at the end of your legs. When you finally worked up the courage last night to remove your shoes, or rather, when the leather finally disintegrated enough to fall off, you discovered feet that looked like they belonged to a corpse that had been underwater for days. The skin was white and wrinkled, peeling away in sheets, and there were sores between your toes and on your heels where the constant moisture and friction had destroyed the tissue. You wrapped them in cloth strips torn from your tunic, which is now so short and ragged that it barely qualifies as clothing, and you're trying not to think about what infections might be establishing themselves in those open wounds. The morning routine is the same as yesterday. Splash water on your face from the communal bucket that's even more questionable today than it was yesterday. Choke down the rock-hard bread that's supposed to sustain you until midday. Join the procession toward the quarry. But today, every step is agony. Your feet are sending urgent distress signals. Your legs are threatening to simply fold, and your back has developed this new grinding sensation that suggests vertebrae are making contact in ways they definitely shouldn't. The walk to the quarry takes twice as long as yesterday because everyone is moving at a wounded shuffle. You're not alone in your deterioration. Every worker around you is displaying the cumulative damage of quarry labor. The man ahead of you has developed a limp so pronounced he's basically hopping. Someone else is cradling an arm that's either dislocated or fractured, though he's still walking toward the quarry because an injury that doesn't immediately kill you isn't sufficient reason to miss work. The hierarchy of pain has become clear. If you can move at all, you're expected to work. Guillaume is waiting at the quarry edge, and he looks exactly the same as yesterday. No additional damage, no visible deterioration, just the same weathered face and missing fingers and casual cruelty. 20 years of this work, and he's somehow still functional, which either means he's found some survival strategy that eludes everyone else, or he's simply lucky in ways that defy statistical probability. He's assigning work crews, pointing workers toward various pit levels, and his stick is already in motion, prodding slower workers toward faster movement. Western Gallery, second level, he tells you, confirming yesterday's assignment. Quotas 5 blocks today. Cathedrals behind schedule. Everyone's quotas are up. 5 blocks. Yesterday's impossible 4 blocks have become today's somehow more impossible 5 blocks. Because of course they have. The system's appetite for stone is infinite, and the fact that workers are physically deteriorating just means the quotas need to increase to compensate for reduced individual productivity. You begin the descent, and immediately you understand that today is going to be worse than yesterday in ways you hadn't anticipated. Your hands can barely grip the ladder rungs. The swelling has reduced their functionality to maybe 30% of normal, and the pain of gripping anything is exquisite. Your arms are shaking from the first rung, the damaged muscles and tendons unable to support your weight without protest. You're moving down the ladder in slow motion, each step a calculated risk, each handhold a moment where you might simply lose your grip and fall. The rope bridge to the second level is its own fresh nightmare. Yesterday, it was terrifying but manageable. Today, with hands that barely function and legs that are threatening mutiny, it's nearly impossible. You're gripping the rope handrails with swollen fingers that can't close properly, shuffling across planks while your feet send screaming signals about the pressure on damaged tissue. Halfway across, you have to stop, frozen in place while the bridge sways beneath you, because your muscles are cramping and your grip is failing and you're genuinely not sure you can make it to the other side. Arnaud is crossing behind you, and he sees you frozen. "Keep moving," he says, not unkindly. "Stop and you'll fall. Just keep going." It's good advice delivered without sympathy, because sympathy doesn't help in the quarry. You force your feet to move, one plank at a time, and eventually you reach the other side, where you collapse against the stone wall and shake for a minute before you can continue. The western gallery is indeed better than the eastern chamber. The ceiling is stable. The floor is only damp rather than flooded, and the stone quality is superior. But better is relative when your body is this damaged. You position yourself in front of the wall section Guillaume has assigned, and you raise your hammer, and the first strike sends such a shock wave of pain through your hands and arms that you actually cry out, a sound you manage to cut off before it becomes too embarrassing. This is day 2. Just day 2. And you're already broken in fundamental ways, already operating at a fraction of yesterday's capacity, already wondering how you'll possibly extract 5 blocks when 4 nearly killed you yesterday. The math is cruel and simple. Each day damages you more. Each day's quota demands more. And the gap between your capacity and the expectations is widening toward an inevitable point where you simply can't continue. You strike the chisel again and again, falling into a rhythm that's slower and more painful than yesterday's but still productive. The stone chips away reluctantly, and you're creating the outline for your first block. And time is doing that weird thing where it simultaneously crawls and races. Each individual hammer strike takes an eternity, but somehow hours are passing, and you've barely made progress. And the first block isn't even close to ready for wedging. Around you, other workers are engaged in their own battles with stone. Bertrand is working nearby, and you can hear his breathing. It's gotten worse overnight, wetter and more labored, the kind of breathing that suggests his lungs are filling with fluid or scar tissue or both. Hugh, the 12-year veteran, is coughing between strikes, bringing up material that he spits onto the gallery floor, and even in the dim lamplight, you can see it streaked with red. Historians still argue whether medieval workers recognized the progressive nature of occupational diseases, whether they understood that today's minor symptoms would become tomorrow's disabilities and next month's death sentences. But watching Hugh cough up blood while continuing to swing his hammer, watching Bertrand struggle for breath while still meeting quota, you understand that recognition doesn't matter. They know they're dying. They know the quarry is killing them. They work anyway because the alternative is immediate starvation rather than eventual death by lung disease. Your first block finally splits, hours into the shift, and you've never been so grateful to hear that rifle shot crack of stone yielding. But getting it to the hoist point requires energy you don't have, and you're reduced to moving it inches at a time, resting between pushes, your back spasming with each effort. Arnaud comes over without being asked and helps you push, and together you get the block positioned for hoisting. He doesn't say anything, just nods and returns to his own work. This small act of solidarity offered without expectation of thanks or reciprocation. The midday bell rings, and you've extracted 1 block, 1 out of 5. The mathematics of failure are staring you in the face. You're impossibly behind, impossibly slow, impossibly broken. The ascent to the surface for the meal break is genuinely questionably not sure you can climb the ladders and cross the bridge in your current state. But staying in the gallery means no food, and no food means no energy, and no energy means definitely failing to meet quota. You make the climb through pure stubbornness, your body operating on fumes and spite. The surface feels like another world, impossibly bright and warm, and you collapse near the food station and wait for your ration. The pottage is the same gray slop as yesterday. The bread is the same weapon-grade hardness. But you consume it mechanically because you need the calories, need anything that might fuel your destroyed body through the afternoon. Guillaume makes his midday rounds, examining workers, assessing productivity, delivering pronouncements about afternoon quotas. He reaches you, looks at your hands, which you've unwrapped to clean as best you can, and his expression doesn't change. 5 blocks by sunset, or you're done, he says, and moves on. No acknowledgement of your deteriorating condition, no adjustment of expectations, just the same impossible demand delivered with the same casual indifference. You're staring at your hands swollen, infected, barely functional, and you're calculating whether it's physically possible to extract 4 more blocks in the remaining hours. The math doesn't work. Even if you pushed yourself beyond collapse, even if you worked with perfect efficiency, the timeline doesn't support the quota. You're going to fail. You're going to be dismissed. You're going to face starvation in a medieval landscape that has no safety net, no social services, no compassion for failed quarry workers. But here's the thing about impossible situations. You attempt them anyway because giving up guarantees the outcome you're trying to avoid. So you finish your pottage, you rewrap your hands with fresh cloth strips, and you begin the descent back into the quarry, back to the western gallery, back to the stone that needs to be extracted regardless of whether your body can extract it. The afternoon shift is a blur of pain and diminishing returns. You extract a second block, then a third, each one taking longer than the last, each one requiring more effort for less result. Your technique is deteriorating. You can feel it in the way the chisel skips, in the way the wedges don't seat properly, in the way blocks split irregularly and require additional work to make them usable. You're in survival mode now, just trying to produce something that resembles a usable block. Quality be damned. The 4th block is fighting you, the stone refusing to cooperate, and you're striking the wedges with desperate force, and something in your shoulder finally gives way completely. You feel it tear, a sensation like rope snapping inside your body, and your right arm goes partially numb. You can still move it, but the strength is gone, the stability compromised, and you're reduced to using your left arm for most of the work, which means everything takes twice as long and hurts twice as much. The sunset bell rings. You've extracted 4 blocks. You're 1 short of quota, 1 short of keeping your job, 1 short of eating tomorrow. The failure is complete and final, and you're sitting in the gallery with your ruined hands and torn shoulder and destroyed feet, and you're understanding with perfect clarity that this is the end of your quarry career. 2 days. You lasted 2 days before the work broke you too thoroughly to continue. The ascent to the surface is the hardest climb you've ever made. Each rung of each ladder a negotiation with a body that's done, that's used up, that has nothing left to give. You reach the surface as the last light is fading, and Guillaume is waiting, and his face confirms what you already know. 4 blocks, he says, and it's not a question. You're out. Collect tomorrow's bread as severance. Then you're gone. And just like that, it's over. 2 days in the medieval quarry, and you're dismissed, cast out, released into a world where you have no prospects, no resources, no way to survive. The other workers are avoiding Icontactuary, a reminder of their own potential fate. Proof that the quarry wins eventually, that bodies break and the stone doesn't care. You collect your bread, a single loaf, hard and stale, and you walk away from the quarry as darkness settles over the landscape. Your body is ruined, your hands infected, your shoulder torn, your feet destroyed, your lungs filling with fluid. You're unemployed in a medieval economy that has no use for disabled workers. You're facing starvation, or worse, with no clear path forward. The cathedral will rise without you. You're 4 blocks from yesterday. You're 4 blocks from today. They'll become part of the structure. Anonymous stones in a sacred edifice. No one will know you extracted them. No one will remember your suffering. The stones will outlast you by centuries, enduring long after your body has decomposed and been forgotten. You look back at the quarry one final time, the pit that consumed 2 days of your life and destroyed your body in the process, and you understand the full cruelty of medieval labor. The quarry doesn't need you to survive. It just needs you to work until you break. Then it replaces you with the next desperate worker. And the cycle continues, an endless supply of bodies converting themselves into building materials for structures they'll never see completed. Tomorrow looks identical to today for the workers who remain. The bell will ring. Guillaume will assign quotas. Stone will be extracted. Bodies will be destroyed. The cathedral will rise, block by block, built on a foundation of suffering that will be completely erased from history. But for you, tomorrow is unknown, unemployed, disabled, cast out into a medieval world that has no mercy for failures. You face an uncertain future with a body that's already checked out. The quarry has taken everything you had to give and deemed it insufficient, used you up and discarded you. Another forgotten casualty in the endless war between human labor and stone. This was your day in a medieval quarry. 2 days, actually, because you were optimistic enough to think you might survive longer. The reality is brutal and simple. You wouldn't last. The work is impossible. The conditions are lethal. And the system is designed to consume workers and produce stone, with no consideration for the human cost. The quarry wins. It always wins. And somewhere in the distance, cathedral is rising, beautiful and eternal, built on foundations you'll never see and suffering you'll never escape. The night is settling in properly now, stars emerging in the darkening sky, and you're walking away from the quarry with nowhere to go and no prospects for survival. Your body is a catalog of damage that medieval medicine can't address, infections that will probably kill you, joint damage that will never heal, lung disease that will slowly suffocate you even if you somehow survive the immediate crisis of unemployment and starvation. But you're still walking, still moving forward, because that's what you do when there are no good options left. Each step is agony. Each breath rattles with fluid and dust. Each heartbeat sends pain signals from your destroyed hands and torn shoulder. You're alive, technically, though the definition of alive has been substantially degraded over the past 2 days. The monastery bells are ringing Compline, the final prayer service of the day, and somewhere monks are singing about divine mercy and eternal rest. The irony isn't lost on you, the praying for souls while you're dying from providing the stones for their sacred spaces. Different roles in the same system, except their role comes with food and shelter and a reasonable expectation of living past 40. You find yourself heading toward the road, toward anywhere that isn't here, toward whatever uncertain future awaits a disabled quarry worker in 1320s Europe. The bread in your hand is probably your last meal for a while. Your body is probably beyond recovery. Your prospects are probably non-existent. But the stars are beautiful tonight, scattered across the sky like chips of light, and you're still alive enough to see them, still conscious enough to appreciate that the universe contains beauty even in its cruelest moments. The cathedral being built with your stone will try to capture this beauty, will create spaces that direct human attention toward the divine, will stand for centuries as a testament to human aspiration. You were part of that creation. For 2 brief days, your hands extracted stone that will become flying buttresses and columns. Your suffering contributed to something that will outlast everything you know. It's cold comfort when you're facing death or permanent disability, but it's something of meaning, however small, in the midst of meaningless suffering. The road stretches ahead into darkness, and you're walking it on destroyed feet, with ruined hands, with a body that's done giving, and you're thinking, this is what it cost. This is the price of beauty, the human expense of architectural ambition, the suffering that gets edited out of history when people marvel at Gothic cathedrals and wonder at medieval achievements. You wouldn't last a day in a medieval quarry. You tried, and you didn't. 2 days of impossible labor, 2 days of systematic destruction, 2 days that prove the work is designed for bodies that don't exist, for endurance that humans can't sustain, for a level of suffering that breaks everyone eventually. The quarry is behind you now, but it's also inside you, in your damaged lungs, in your infected hands, in your torn shoulder and destroyed feet. You're carrying it forward into whatever future you have left, a walking testament to the cost of stone, to the price of cathedrals, to the forgotten suffering that built medieval Europe's greatest achievements. And somewhere back at the quarry, the night shift is probably starting, yes. There's a night shift, because stone extraction never truly stops, and new workers are descending into the pit, and Guillaume is assigning quotas, and the system continues its endless consumption of human bodies in service of architectural glory. Tomorrow, the sun will rise on a world where you're no longer a quarry worker, where you're no longer employed, where you're simply another displaced person trying to survive in a landscape that has no use for you. The quarry won't notice your absence. The cathedral project won't pause. Your stones will be placed without ceremony, incorporated into the structure, lost among thousands of identical blocks. But tonight, under these stars, walking this dark road toward an uncertain future, you carry the knowledge of what it costs. You know the price of beauty. You understand the suffering behind the sacred. And even if no one else remembers, even if history erases your existence completely, you'll know you were there. You extracted the stone. You paid the price.